Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So I want to welcome fellow Cabinet members, councillors, members of the public. Today, as usual, a summary version of the agenda and reports are available at this meeting today, together with copies of the public forum which the Cabinet have received and all read. The full reports are available on the Council's website. Two supplements to the main agenda items papers were published on Tuesday, the 25th of February. This contained agenda item 19, Bristol Highways Asset Management and Associated Works Framework, and agenda item 22, Bristol Energy Limited Operational Update, March 2020. A further supplement, agenda item 6, Report from Scrutiny Commission on Special Educational Needs and Disabilities, was published on Monday, the 2nd of March. Agenda item 22, Bristol Energy Limited Operational Update March 2020, is included under APR 15 as a general exception because it was not listed on the forward plan as including a key decision 28 days prior to this meeting. I can confirm the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny Management Board has been notified of this. This report contains commercially sensitive information and will be considered in exempt session. I can also confirm that Cabinet members and the relevant scrutiny members have had access to this report. The following items contain exempt appendices. Item 11, management arrangements and investment opportunities for leisure centres and swimming pools. Item 18, heat networks, special purpose vehicle. They contain information that is commercially sensitive. I can confirm that Cabinet members and the members of the relevant Scrutiny Commission have had access to this information ahead of this meeting. Can I draw your attention now to the emergency evacuation procedure, which is outlined on the agenda and is currently being displayed on the screen. Thank you for making sure that you are fully aware of that. And please note that the meeting is webcast. So can I ask you once again to use the microphone when you speak to make sure that the people watching over the internet can actually hear you. Agenda item 2 is a public forum, and this is a reminder that statements and questions will be taken at the time the relevant agenda item is discussed. Questions received are contained in the public forum pack and will also be displayed on the screen at the appropriate time in the meeting. And I will give a reply or ask the relevant Cabinet member to respond at that time. Agenda item 3 is apologies for absence. We've got 2 absents today, Councillor Nicola Beach and Councillor Steve Pearce. Agenda item 4, declarations of interest. Can I ask any Cabinet members if you have any interest to declare in relation to today's agenda? None. Okay. Agenda item 5, matters referred for consideration by scrutiny or full council. There are none on this occasion. Agenda item 6, reports from scrutiny commissions. So Councillor Claire Hiscott is to present the outcome and recommendations from Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Evidence Day.
Thank you. I hope Cabinet have had time to read the entire SEND report and our recommendations after our evidence day in February. I think what has struck me most about taking this forward was it actually that the whole day and the investigation demonstrates the power of listening to experts, listening to parents, listening to partners. And so we had excellent contributions from experts in their fields, from respected lawyers to input from the LGA and learning difficulties specialists. And so I want to publicly thank everybody involved, especially local head teachers who came along, gave up their time, backfilled their lessons and we're open and honest about how we are dealing with our special educational needs and disabled children. And what was really clear was that we need to work harder, listen more carefully, and focus on the child. Because no parent should ever feel powerless when it comes to caring for their child or getting the services they feel they need. So that was the absolute crux of the reason for the day. So I would also like to thank Councillor Anna Keane for her collaboration in this, and I'd like to thank the Director of Education, Alison Hurley, for her really constructive help. This was definitely cross-party working at its best. There was absolutely no political motivation, had great support from Councillor Comley, Councillor Kent and Councillor Phipps. And I think what we have found is we've given you a list of recommendations, and I'm delighted that they're going to be, incorporated into our written statement of action to go forwards. But it also gave local councillors, backbenchers, just some real insight and knowledge so that they are better equipped for helping their residents and for any child that needs assistance. The report is very clear. It was not just about money. It was about child-focused partnership working. And Councillor Keane and I are very, I think, united that it's not just about money, but that we will continue to ask for more money and that we will continue to work with the Local Government Association and to lobby government. So at the same time as getting it right, our services right, we will be properly resourced. So I'd like to thank every parent that contributed, everybody involved. I think it was scrutiny at its best, and I commend this report to Cabinet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anna Keane?
Yeah, just to come back on that, thank you very much, Claire, for the huge amount of work you did leading that. And I know it was alongside other councillors, but you did, I know, personally put in a lot of hours into it as well. And also just for sort of bringing that through. And just to echo a couple of things that you've said, I really agree that it is scrutiny at its best. We've often had discussions, in fact, during Cabinet meetings, haven't we, about whose role is it to bring things to scrutiny. And it was a very good example of something that was very reflective of what was being talked about, both within and most importantly outside of this building, something which is a national concern and certainly a concern in Bristol. So I think it was a really worthwhile topic to shine a light on, and as you say, that day gave a lot of different angles. I think that it was great to hear from the Local Government Association, for example, about the national picture. Was really, really helpful to get that picture, and as you say, from so many different people. And I think that like you, we take forward some of the comments we had at the last People Scrutiny meeting about perhaps having more voice of children at future days like that. It's not always the easiest thing to coordinate, but I think we need to sort of all reflect on that. And just finally, really to say, again, I don't think any decent councillor would try to make this a political issue, and it's been absolutely the right way to work on it, cross-party. It's been completely sort of political, hats off, and just trying to be very sort of child and family focused in working on this. So I'm grateful to you, and as you say, the other councillors that worked really hard on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both, and it's great to hear of really good work happening with our scrutiny function. So let me just throw forward now. So Councillor Jeff Gollop will present a report on behalf of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board regarding Bristol Energy, and this will be taken with item 22 in the exempt session. So we do have some statements received. We have one from Councillor Clive Stevens, who is attending. So Clive.
Thank you. I'm a great fan of good scrutiny, and this was good scrutiny, and I think it can make for better decisions. I'd like to thank Anna Keane for supporting Claire Hiscott and all the others, really. It was a great job. There's one area I want to focus on, but firstly, the LGA report says that core to a well-run special education needs programme is mutual trust with parents, and it's clear that was broken. I think what you did the other day is a step forward to repairing that, because if you don't repair it, our EHCP emergency will go on and on and on. There's one thing in the report I'd like to note, at 7.17, I guess, which talks about identifying good practice, about better informing co-production, early intervention work, even before an application needs to be put in. For me, this is key to the future. It brings better outcomes for child, of the ability to stay on in mainstream, proves that is the right way to go.
50 seconds, Clive.
Yeah. So Bristol could decide to lead the country in its approach to our special children, and it would be great if you would take this challenge on.
Right, thank you very much for your contribution. Okay, so that brings an end to that item there, and I can just say assured that I think, you know, with our leadership and the change we've had in the organisation, that this is a challenge we want to take on. We've made that commitment along the lines of Michael Marmot to making sure that every child gets off to the best possible start in life, and with the Children's Charter, irrespective of the circumstances of their birth, that we make sure that they do have a chance to live lives of hope. So yeah, we welcome all contributions to how we meet that challenge. So on to another for agenda item 7, which is Chair's business. I'm just going to use this just to bring to Cabinet today our One City Environment and Sustainability Board's work to develop the One City Climate Strategy. So we launched this on the 26th of February at the last Environment and Sustainability Board. The board represents a whole range of partners that we've brought together through a recruitment process with Bristol Green Capital Partnership from across the public, private and voluntary sector, backed up actually for the whole city with a committee on climate change, an advisory panel of experts from our 2 universities to really shape the way Bristol as a whole city approaches the challenge of climate change, in particular the challenge of getting to carbon neutrality by 2030. And I bring it today so I can use this Cabinet as the opportunity to formally endorse this strategy on behalf of Bristol City Council, as we see other organisations coming also to endorse this strategy over the coming weeks, just like we did with the Ecological Emergency Declaration a couple of weeks ago. And really, the important thing for me, and this, in many ways, this strategy is that it really takes it beyond the declaration. We've obviously done our work within Bristol City Council, but if we're serious about it, we know that our impact on the planet is not just down to the City Council and its decisions alone. It takes a combined effort from us, across education, across public, private, voluntary sector, across the whole suite of organisations that shape life and lifestyles and life systems within Bristol. So that one city, that joined up approach is absolutely essential. Principles to me that underpin the strength of this strategy, and I would really encourage people to go online and have a look at it, is one, is it needs that whole city approach, but also it needs to be built on evidence and expertise. I had an interview with, I won't say the outlet recently, it's not local, it's a national, and one of the points I'll make is, and Alex Minchell makes actually, is when you have an emergency, it's good to feel urgent about it and have that sense of panic, but actually at some point someone needs to have an understanding of the nature of that emergency and what the best avenues of intervention are, and that takes looking at some real evidence. And what we have in this climate strategy is real evidence and real expertise giving the city a real framework within which to take action. I think what the strategy also does is sets an incredibly challenging and a real stretch set of outcomes for us to reach. And that's right, because reaching carbon neutrality by 2030 is not easy. If it was easy, everyone would just have signed off and done it. So we walk this tightrope of making sure that we are setting out the scale of ambition that we need to meet and we want to pursue, but having some very realistic, we'll say realistic, they're realistic but nonetheless challenging methods and plans to actually get there. One of the phrases that's been used about the challenge facing our city on carbon neutrality 2030 is to describe it as needing a scale and pace of change for the city, unprecedented outside preparations for war. And yet we don't have the immediacy of an enemy standing up directly in our face showing us what we have to take on, which feeds into another point I think is going to have to go along with this strategy and the ecological strategy that we're writing at the moment, which is we have to take the city with us. We have to maintain our democratic mandate. Not being an authoritarian regime, we cannot just command and control. So meeting the needs of our city across poverty and inequality to make sure that they know they're being respected through the whole process as well. And we're making the financial and emotional space for people to engage in these existential threats that perhaps are not immediate to them in a way that we know they're immediate to the planet is absolutely essential. So as we go on today, we will hear about some of the other areas in which we are already taking action on climate change. None of this is, many of the things that are already in train, what we've needed to do is get them organised. And I look forward to sharing those as the time goes on. The next steps for this strategy in terms of the One City plan is, one is to take it to our multi-board group. We have 6 thematic boards underneath the One City office across health and wellbeing, homes and communities, transport and skills, economy. And so that joint meeting of those boards will come together under the to look at this climate strategy. It will also come to the leaders' breakfast, whereby we pull together chief execs of the key organisations in Bristol. And we'll also be rolling out a series of seminars to support organisations in Bristol to understand the strategy and work out how they're going to apply it in their own plans for their future, their own strategic plans, and make it real for them, which I think is incredibly welcome. So that's up. Please have a look at that strategy and engage with it, grapple with it, challenge it, endorse it, support it. But I say it's a pretty special piece of work for Bristol. So let's move on to agenda item 8 now, which is the property strategy, asset management plan. And Craig Cheney, you're going to introduce this one.
Thank you, Marvin. Bristol City Council is the owner and occupier of a hugely diverse and valuable property estate with a value of over £1 billion. The effective and efficient use of that extensive estate is fundamental to delivering quality public services and supporting and driving the achievement of the Mayor and the Council's objectives. An effective property strategy with its foundations of consistent standards and decision-making and robust asset planning is critical to achieving an effective and efficient property estate. A fundamental element of the corporate property strategy is establishing and embedding a corporate landlord approach to managing property assets. Corporate landlord is designed to enable a local authority landowner to utilise its assets to deliver better, more efficient services to communities. The concept of a corporate landlord model is that governance, decision-making and budget management around property assets, as well as the management and maintenance of those assets, is carried out at a corporate strategic level rather than at a service or occupier level. The corporate property strategy sets out the objectives, policies and process for the managing the estate. It aims to deliver a fully operational corporate landlord which centralises all property functions, a revised system of governance that is understood by all and improves the current decision-making processes, consolidation of existing policies around property, ensures that all property transactions take account of social value in assessing their impact, ensures that there are clearly defined responsibilities and mechanisms for all property matters, a complementary financial framework which recognises the need for budget centralisation and adjustment to ensure all property income and spend is managed corporately and is adequately reflected in appropriate cost centres. The corporate property strategy also sets out the principles and framework for developing an asset management plan, which will drill down into more detail on the options around individual properties through a series of property reviews and will consolidate the results of working with services to understand and develop their property requirements into service asset management plans. A clear governance structure will be developed to underpin this new corporate approach to decision-making and budget management around property assets. So in summary, I'm asking Cabinet to agree the adoption of the corporate property strategy and to authorise us to review and update that again in 3 years' time, and also to delegate authority to the Exec Director for Growth and Regen, along with myself and the Director of Finance, to consolidate all property-related spend that exists in other service budgets once we've completed the asset management plan.
Thanks very much, Craig. So we've got one statement, 2 questions. Can I have the statement first, please, from Councillor Don Alexander?
Thanks, Marvin. To have a plan for how a large organisation manages its property is incredibly basic, and this document at last charts the way forward. It's also incredibly expensive not to do this properly when you have £1 billion of property to manage. Previous leaderships left this council in administrative chaos, and I wish to thank the officers who have worked so hard on this strategy.
Thanks very much, Don, and point well made. Public forum questions now. We have a question from Councillor Clive Stevens.
Thank you. It's to do with social value for community groups, maybe voluntary groups, and it seems that this document is forcing them down a community asset transfer route, which might not be best for all of them.
So, yeah, so I guess part of the point of this plan is to try and create some structure around what is a very unstructured situation we find ourselves in at the moment. We've got agreements not documented and all over the place sometimes. So, yes, I guess the direction is to move people towards a community asset transfer. As someone who, before I was a councillor, I was a trustee of an organisation that's embarked on a community asset transfer. It took 3 years to complete. So I am well aware of how complicated that process can be, and that's something that we absolutely have to look at. But also there are, you know, quite often that is where organisations are looking for a long-term lease. CAT transfers don't necessarily have to be long-term. They often are, because a long-term lease allows you to leverage in other funding. So I guess what we need to do is make sure that we have a CAT process that's fit for, or CAT policy that's fit for what we want to achieve. So I actually think what would probably be good would be some sort of some scrutiny task and finish group or something that could look at how we could do that, and take in. So I think there's a comment about how councillors should be community champions, you know, and it would be a really good piece of work to work out how that might all fit together.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll discuss that with Jeff Gollop and see how that flies.
Okay, we have a question from Martin Fodor. He's not here. Okay. Okay, so that was for that section. So any comments from any of the Cabinet members? No? Okay, well, let me hand back to you now, Craig, to take the decision, which I support.
Thank you, Marvin. In making this decision, I've taken into consideration the equalities relevance check in the report. In terms of the decision to be made today, I approve the recommendations as set out in the report.
So we're staying with you, Craig, for agenda item 9, North and East Bristol Universal Business Support Project.
Back in December, we brought forward the South Bristol Enterprise Support Project, a project designed to provide business coaching, support and grant funding to residents and businesses in Philwood, Hartcliffe and Withywood, Hengrove and Whitchurch Park, and parts of Bedminster, Windmill Hill, Bishopsworth, Knowle and Stockwood. The North and East Bristol Universal Business Support Project will complement that and will target both prospective entrepreneurs and existing businesses based in wards and communities with higher levels of socio-economic disadvantage across the north and east of the city, as well as social groups underrepresented in enterprise, young people, women, BAME and disabled people. The project will provide entrepreneurship coaching, advice and support services, including grant schemes aimed at residents and businesses, and co-financed by BCC and WECA over a 3-year period. Over the first phase, we will seek to engage with over 700 prospective entrepreneurs and trading businesses and provide intensive support to around 160 of these, creating 60 new full-time equivalent jobs and significant additional economic value. In view of the large SME population across the North and East Bristol, continuation over a further 3-year period up to 2026 is hoped for, subject to funding under Phase 2 of the WECA Productivity Challenge Universal Business Support. It will be principally promoted and targeted via community-based partnerships and outreach centres in wards in the north and east of the city, where enterprise formation and growth rates have tended to lag behind the Bristol and West of England average, in some cases for several decades. Priority communities are North Bristol, Avonmouth and Lawrence Weston, Henbury, Southmead, Lockleaze and Upper Horfield, and in East Central Bristol, St Paul's, St Jude's, Easton, Lawrence Hill, Barton Hill, St George, Hillfields and Froome Vale. So I'm asking Cabinet to approve the following recommendations: that the Council accept and spend the WECA grant awarded at its January Joint Committee, and that the Council be the lead and accountable body for the implementation of the North and East Bristol Universal Business Support Project. That we approve the commissioning of delivery partners for the project at a total value of 0.9 million over 3 years, following WECA funding approved at the Productivity Challenge Universal Business Support Programme, and subject to sufficient match funding being confirmed from the Council and private sources. Authorise the Exec Director for Growth and Regen, in consultation with the Service Director of Economy of Place and the Cabinet Member for Finance, to take all necessary steps to commission and enter into agreements with delivery partners and funding agreements with WECA and private and charitable sector partners. So this is business support for some of the poorest communities in the city and in fact the country, to align with our existing programme supporting the south of the city. Another step on our journey to help create an inclusive and sustainable city.
Thanks, Craig. So we had no public forum questions or statements on this item. Can I ask any of the Cabinet members if they'd like to speak to this one? No, well, I'll just say is again, just as you just described at the end, Craig, the importance of finding ways of investing in people in Bristol, in communities that historically have been left behind from all the great wealth that flies around Bristol. And something we said from the beginning, that we want to celebrate Bristol's success and its power and being a net contributor to the Treasury and all these things that we roll off. But we cannot afford to have a city in which the wealth in the economy races off over the hill and leaves everyone else behind. So we've got to take these measures to invest and support people in communities that have been left behind historically. So let me hand back to you now to take the decision which I support.
In making this decision, I've taken into consideration the Equalities Impact Assessment in the report, and in terms of the decision to be made today, I approve the recommendations as set out in the report.
Okay, agenda item 10, extension to award of contract for provision and CCT and Fibre. And this is seeking approval to increase the value of the contract award sum from £400,000 up to £1 million for the CCTV fibre installation, supply and maintenance contract. I'll let you do the details.
Thanks. So Cabinet may recall that 2 years ago now, I think, we brought forward a paper to basically sort of bring all of our CCTV contracts into one bigger contract rather than various services running their own independent contracts. In doing that, we did extend the existing, or one of the existing contracts with Select Electrical Limited. What we found out, and we agreed that with a spend of about 10% of the contract due to the length of time that was left, which was 400,000. What we found out since is that there's a lot more spend going on around the organisation on CCTV. So what we're asking to do is just to be able to spend more money through this contract from existing budget lines that we're already effectively spending money on CCTV.
So we've had no public forum statements or questions on this one. Any other Cabinet members? Guy.
Yeah, just to welcome this report really is something that comes up quite often in my own ward in terms of that sort of low-level crime, tagging, antisocial behaviour, that kind of thing. And I've been made aware that through this contract there'll be improvements to parts of my ward, King Square, Jamaica Street, where we've been getting a lot of representations from small businesses and the people that live in the flats there are a bit worried about the crime and disorder. So it's something that I think people really want in certain areas to tackle that sort of low-level disorder that goes on.
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of that will be once we commission the bigger contract, but yeah, thanks, Guy.
Any other Cabinet members? I'll back that too. I mean, as we've launched on this campaign to clean up Bristol, we've had the clean streets and the big tidy going on, just some interaction with those parties to get some guidance on how we implement would be fantastic as well. But let me hand back to you now, Craig, to take the decision which I support.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose on CCTV is one of these things that there's a block of flats in our ward that that people would be terrified actually to walk up their own stairwells, because they would get there and there'd be gangs of kids hanging out and people doing drugs and other things in there. So, and the introduction of cameras has improved the lives of the people living in those flats, and we go door to door there, and you can see the happiness in their eyes of how their lives, the weight is lifted from them. So, so it's really important. In terms of the decisions to be made today, I approve the recommendation as set out in the report.
Thank you very much, Craig. So agenda item 11, management arrangements and investment opportunities for leisure centres and swimming pools, is for me. And just to say, this item does contain an exempt appendix. Cabinet members are reminded to indicate if they wish to discuss any information in exempt session, in which case we will move into exempt session. So it has been said that we are the most pro-sport administration Bristol has seen. And we're building on that reputation here today. So this report recommends a future management option for the delivery of services across our leisure centres and swimming pools, currently operated by Sports and Leisure Management. So in 2006, the council entered into a 15-year leisure management contract with SLM to provide leisure services across the 6 facilities. Now, this contract does come to an end in March 2022, so we need to have new leisure management arrangements in place across these leisure centres and our swimming pools. So we've been working with specialist leisure consultants to explore how we can get the best deal for Bristol, linked to investment opportunities to ensure full alignment with our strategic approach and our wider commitment to sport, mass participation, talent getting every opportunity to develop, and bringing world-class sporting events to the city. So given the current age and condition of a lot of the council's leisure facilities, this is a good time to review our investment into our portfolio to enable us to continue delivering on the sports and physical activity strategy we have for Bristol. So it's likely to create a better interest in the leisure operator market if there is a package of investment linked to an upcoming procurement exercise. So this is an example of our commitment and investment in Bristol sport and public health, as we, as well as practical fiscal responsibility with the city's money. So on this item, unfortunately, there were no public forum statements or questions. Can I ask if any other cabinet members wish to comment on this one? I thought you'd be in there like a shot, Kai, with the sports angle.
No, it's obviously something that we knew was coming up on the horizon. We've got some great figures in Bristol around participation in comparison to other core cities. We know there's areas that we need to improve on, certain demographics that don't participate compared to other demographics. And obviously this swimming pool issue is something that we're committed to resolving, whether that be enhancements to Eastern or finding the right location in East Bristol to build a new pool. The swimming pool capacity is definitely something that we need to deal with, and obviously we've got that commitment in the capital budget as well. The money's there to make those improvements. So welcome this report.
Thank you. Anyone else? I mean, I would say we do have some good numbers, but the inequalities in participation between different communities is a massive issue for us, isn't it? And how that plays out, both in terms of physical activity and health, as we know about, but also the mental, emotional, personal development, social skills that go along with participation in sports. So our challenge here is to making sure we're making best use of our assets to make sure that people, and let's be frank about it, it's people from poor backgrounds who don't go to schools with beautiful playing fields and facilities, get access to every opportunity people in the wealthier parts of the city get to engage in good, organised, coached physical activity for their own betterment and for their personal development as well. So that's something I benefited from, and I hope we can extend that benefit to other, not just young people, but older people who want to continue to be physically active in Bristol as well. So thanks for your comment there, Kai. So in making this decision, I've taken into consideration the equalities impact assessment in the report. In terms of the decision to be made today, I approve the recommendations as set out in this report. So let's move on to another area of, I think, of real political significance, actually, not just in what we do, but in terms of the statement we're making about the culture, tone, and nature of politics in the UK and, dare I say, Europe and across the world. And that's agenda item 12, our refugee and asylum seeker inclusion strategy. And Asha, you're going to be presenting this paper today.
I am, thank you, Mary. So Bristol is a city of sanctuary, and we take great pride in leading a city which prizes its ability to offer welcome and hospitality to those fleeing persecution and conflict around the world. But it also stands as a challenge to Bristol City Council, and indeed the city, to be proactive and vigilant in making our status as a city of sanctuary real and tangible for asylum seekers and refugees in our cities. Refugees and asylum seekers face a range of challenges in Bristol, and these were set out in a needs assessment undertaken in 2007. And as a result of this, we were working on a welcoming asylum seekers and refugees strategy, which was drafted but never finalised or implemented. Refugees and asylum seekers interact with a variety of different service areas within the council, but there was no mechanism for joined-up thinking or working to ensure that these interactions were as positive as possible. There have been several high-profile incidents involving refugee and asylum seekers in the city in the last few years, and most notably Kamil Ahmed and Bijan Ibrahimi, whose deaths highlighted areas where the council's practice was deficient. Both myself and the Mayor asked for the draft strategy to be refreshed in consultation with Bristol City Council officers, and as a result of working across the council, we are now ready to bring the strategy to Cabinet for approval. The strategy before you sets out how we will live up to the challenges identified. Refugee and asylum seekers often arrive in Bristol following traumatic experiences in their countries of origin and on their journeys to the UK. We want to ensure that these individuals are supported to rebuild their lives and make a full contribution to Bristol. We believe that the skills, experience, and resilience of refugees and asylum seekers are powerful assets for our city, and that their inclusion enhances our city and our communities. The strategy therefore sets out how the council will do it, not just to meet the basic needs, but also to support their full economic and social inclusion for the benefit of us all. The experiences of those seeking sanctuary in Bristol are often shaped as much by national and international rules as they are by local policies and initiatives. Whilst we are rarely able to control these wider structures, we must play our part alongside others in seeking to shape and improve them, and this strategy also sets out our ambitions in this regard. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who's been involved in the shaping of this strategy, which is the work of many hands over a long period of time. It has had input from many different elected officials and council staff, as well as from our partner organisations across the city. And crucially, it has also been shaped by those within the council and outside who have lived experience of coming to the UK as asylum seekers and refugees. This strategy has grown out of strong partnership working, and we are confident that this same spirit of collaboration will guide its implementation in an effort to be more transparent. So the Cabinet are recommended to approve the Refugee and Asylum Seeker Inclusion Strategy for Bristol. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Asha, for bringing this paper, and we'll come back to some more thanks later. I'm pleased we've had two questions on what I think is an issue of huge political significance, at least. So first from Don Alexander. Thanks, Don.
Thank you. I'm very pleased indeed to see the Council taking seriously its responsibilities towards its citizens who are refugees and asylum seekers. For many, the upcoming elections in May might be their first chance to vote. Could you please tell us which of these citizens will be allowed to vote, because there is sometimes a bit of confusion between general elections, local elections, EU, etc., and what strategies we have for engaging with them to explain their rights to them? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Alexander. My understanding is that only British citizens, Irish citizens, EU citizens, or citizens of certain qualifying Commonwealth countries are eligible to vote. It is, though, worth noting that the Scottish Parliament has recently voted to allow all those legally resident in Scotland, including all those with refugee status, to vote in Scottish elections. They've also given all those with indefinite leave to remain the right to be candidates in elections. This shows what can be done with proper devolution of powers.
Thanks, Asha. Did you have a follow-up, Don? Okay. So, and then we have a question from Clive Stevens.
Thank you, Asha. I really welcome this report. It's great. I'd like to make a suggestion, which you may or may not like. I noted in it that you talk about employment opportunities within the council, and I was wondering whether some businesses might be incentivised to take that up as well. I've put in my preamble some ideas, but I mean, I know how having a job really assists with inclusion and integration. So I'm wondering if there's anything that can be done along those lines, and also what we can do as councillors.
Thanks, Clive. It's a really good question and one we've been thinking about and working on. So we're lucky here in Bristol to have a number of great organisations already working to support the inclusion of refugee and asylum seekers, including ACH, who specialise in working with businesses on this topic. The Council has therefore been looking to work in partnership with them to encourage employers to hire refugees. There have been some real successes already. For example, First Bus, who partnered with ACH to make sure that refugees can make best use of council, and we've also partnered with ACH to make sure that refugees can make best use of council-run job fairs. You're right to highlight support in your question around language learning as key, and this is a point we are raising through our work on an ESOL strategy for Bristol and the region, which we hope will inform how WECA allocate the adult education budget, which has been devolved to them. Creating partnerships with employers so people can learn English while on the job is something that we are also keen to explore. In terms of what councillors can do to help, you can talk to employers in your ward and raise the possibility of employing refugees or offering work taster sessions to asylum seekers who are not yet legally allowed to work. You can connect them to ACH, who would be happy to follow up. Message to businesses needs to be that refugees and asylum seekers represent hidden talent here in this city. They are talents that we need to unlock. We also prioritise offering short-term work experience placements to people who are underrepresented within our current workforce. Therefore, we would be keen to support in offering work experience opportunities to asylum seekers and refugees who can gain an insight into the world of work and undertake real work challenges whilst on placement. Within this offer, we will arrange careers guidance, meeting with various team members and providing an insight into the work that we do.
Do you have a follow-up, Clive?
No follow-up. Thank you very much. Sounds very exciting.
Yeah. Can I offer to any other cabinet members, Helen?
Thank you, Marvin. And I just wanted to reinforce the support for the strategy, and with my responsibility for the Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme, which is just ending, the government scheme, but we are committed to carrying on with the global resettlement scheme. I just wanted to give Cabinet some of the facts and figures about how many people we've been able to support. So our first 3 families under that scheme arrived in March 2016, and as of today we've resettled 72 families. That's 338 people in Bristol. We've got 2 community sponsorship families and another 7 families in the pipeline to arrive, so Bristol will have welcomed 394 people under the VPRS. There are 9 people in our team and they manage 92 properties. They do a fantastic job, and working to get landlords to commit to giving their properties actually has proved very successful, because of course they have guaranteed income from the rent, because the rent is paid through the VPRS. We've celebrated the arrival of 20 babies who've been born in the UK. We've seen 2 marriages and 1 engagement. Sadly, we've also seen 2 divorces and a funeral, but recognise that the people who come are people who've gone through huge trauma, and the impact of that on their families as they settle here is bound to be huge. But I was just going to pick up on Clive's question. So on the Bristol VPRS scheme, 1 person has set up their own shisha business, and another 11 men are currently in work, and 10 others have previously worked. 10 people have taken part in a 6-month small business course, and 3 are running a small businesses, although the businesses aren't commercially viable yet, so we're supporting them to make those businesses viable. There's 1 fantastic embryonic business of some Syrian women who started their own catering firm, and I can recommend, if you're having a community event, please use them because they are really, really good. We've made a film to celebrate the end of the VPRS scheme, which we showed at People's Scrutiny. I think you've seen it, Marvin. When we showed it at People last week, people who were there will remember there was not a dry eye in the house by the end of the film. It is fantastic. And we should all feel proud about the way that we are being able to give life back to those families. And I hope, and I'm sure that when we continue our commitment through the global resettlement scheme, that we'll continue to have some amazing stories from the people who come here.
Thanks, Helen. Any other Cabinet members to speak on this?
Yeah.
Oh, Asha, you're going to come
Yeah,
back?
I just wanted to add, it's through initiatives like this and us being a city of sanctuary where, I feel even more proud of Bristol as a city. I really want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank those officers who have, they go beyond the call of duty when it comes to working in this particular area and with these groups of individuals. They are second to none. And to also all of the organisations, the voluntary and community sector organisations, refugee groups, and just ordinary members of the public who've opened up their own homes to these families. I from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank each and every one of you who've made that commitment.
Did you want to speak, Anna, as well?
Just briefly to echo that, and the film, which I hope we can show at some point because it's brilliant, that details the what Helen was just speaking about. There's a man in it, a father, who describes coming to Bristol with, he had no objects with him. He said, I only have my soul. And it just brought home to me how fortunate most of our children are in terms of what they're surrounded by, and how the children that have come and been part of this programme who have no choice where they're born and what they're born into, and being able to bring some of that justice and equality through schemes like this that are often not talked about enough, that can easily go under the radar and not have very much publicity around them, is really remarkable. And we're just really grateful for all the people that have gone that extra mile and been involved with it.
I think we're all touched by this one. I mean, I went for lunch last week with a young man who was actually receiving quite a lot of media attention last year. So he was smuggled into the country as a 14-year-old, left on the streets of Keynsham, alone, no English, one evening, had enough to find a police station, ended up in a care system, went to St Mary Redcliffe School. In 2 years, managed to get on top of his English, turned around some good GCSEs. He participated in our city leadership programme, ended up meeting an amazing guy, Graham Kotzel. We made an introduction because we took him for lunch. He said, what do you want to do? He said, I want to be able to take care of my family. I said, what are you interested in? He said, finance. I said, I know someone in finance. He went for lunch with Graham. Anyway, long story short, get offered an apprenticeship at Rowan Dartington. And obviously, then he turned 18, having been offered the apprenticeship. Then he received his letter from the Home Office to deport him. And anyway, you went down, Asher, to his trial. Graham went down from London. St Mary Redcliffe went down. Anyway, he got the back in, and we said, this is a remarkable young man, and he got his leave to remain, so he's on his 2-year window. And last week he took me and Graham out for lunch, on his own dime, And but also comes out of that the fullness of this story, that he hasn't seen his mother for 5 years. And, you know, we asked, what do you think of your mum? You know, because she said, you've got to leave the country, there's nothing for you here. And he said, strong woman. You think about that story, a parent watching their child leave, right? The strength it takes not knowing what's going to happen to them and not seeing them for 5 years. And then ultimately she got proved right, because he's here, he's got status, but now he's talking about how he can go back and find his mum and meet her again. But obviously I got to make a big judgment, because if he leaves the country, will we let him back in, right? Because, you know, all sorts of things can happen. And if he goes, would he be trapped if he went back to Albania to find his mum? Would the country let him out? So we want to support him. And actually, we suggested he reaches out to Karen Smith as well before he does any travel, to make sure. This is our Bristolian young man here that's come here and found a home. And it is a testament, as you say, Asher, to the city and to the people that work in the city to make that real. On this particular strategy, I just want to thank, I can see them here, David Barclay, Forward Masikwadzo, who have given, you know, have acted not just on a local level, but acted on a national and an international level as well, by influencing both the Global Compact on Migration, the Global Compact on Refugees, and Forward's footprint in Bristol on this goes back to the founding, you know, the launch of Bristol as a city of sanctuary as well, and also his own personal story of coming here and finding Bristol as a home as well. So it is a real source of pride. If I can just say just a couple of other things, if I can just take Mayor's privilege, actually. One is, we need to reframe, I talked about this the other week as part of the Mayor's Migration Council. We need to reframe the way we see migrants, refugees, asylum seekers as assets, not just not problems to be managed. Mohammed Al-Sharif said to me, we come here with skills, we come to make a contribution. It needs to be a whole reframing of the way we think about that. It's also, just to share, I think the conversation around migrants and refugees doesn't stop with migrants and refugees. On a very, very personal level, when it begins to cut up and get rough, I'm very aware of my standing in this country. The white side of my family go back in Bristol for centuries. But I sometimes receive the message that in that series of concentric circles of belonging, I'm not in the middle circle. And when we start to purify that idea of who belongs where and who has a right to be where, I sometimes feel that knock is going to come on my door one day as well. So we've got to think about what cultural understandings of belonging are released into the wider city and country when we don't take a stand on being a city of sanctuary, a city of welcome and hope. And it's also worth just pointing out, we just talked about our climate strategy. In 2006, the Stern report suggested that by 2050, we could face between 200 million and 1 billion climate migrants as a result. Now, Yvonne Sawyer, who's one of the mayors on the Mayor of Freetown on the Mayor's Migration Council, one of the things that she talks a lot about is the need for European and North American governments, as in global north, to be cities that offer a welcome. Again, we've had murders that don't end up with people being killed, but we also need to be cities and countries, even though I think countries are failing, but cities need to get involved in the push factors. Political instability, climate change, you know, and inequality, and so forth, which is what we are determined to do here as a real measure of core social injustice. So this really, I think, is massively important for us as a Bristol, both locally and internationally. Okay, having indulged, let me hand back to you now, Asher, to take the decision which I support.
Thank you. So in making this decision, I have taken into consideration the equalities impact assessment in the report. And in terms of the decision to be made today, I approve the recommendations as set out in the report.
Thank you very much. And thank you again to the team for bringing this through. David, forward. I'm going to hand over to Craig now to chair the next item or two, and I'll be back shortly.
Thanks, Marvin. So next up, agenda item 13, grant funding for information, advice and guidance services. This report seeks approval for the extension of the information, advice and guidance service grant for IAG services. Can I ask Councillor Asher Craig to introduce the report?
Thank you. So, as Councillor Cheney says, the report seeks approval for the extension of the IAG grant for information, advice and guidance services for a year from the 1st of November 2020 to the 30th of October 2021, with the option to extend for a further 2.5 years to 30th of April 2024. The financial commitment will amount to a total of 1.96 million during the 3.5-year period. The Council has grant-funded community information, advice and guidance services since 2011 and 12. And these services currently support some of the poorest and most excluded citizens in the city. Effective triage at advice centres ensures that advice is targeted to those most in need. Austerity and welfare reform have placed significant pressures on the sector, whilst marked reductions in our budgets have necessitated a reduction in the funding for advice provision. With these challenges in mind, a new grant funding plan was developed in 2019-20, and those are appended at Appendix X, for externally funded advice services. The time frame of the grant was 18 months in order to give us time to work with a wider corporate project and to test the approach. This proposal is about building on the positive impact of the new model and providing stability to a very important sector. So going forward, the intention will be to ensure the voluntary and community social enterprise sector advice centres organisations is part of the City Council's strategic approach to advice and ethical debt. It is therefore proposed that there is the opportunity to review the grant arrangement to align with the strategic direction of the Council going forward. The current grant relates to advice provision of around 5 main types of advice: welfare benefits, housing, employment, money and debt, and immigration, including specialist provision of disability and legal advice in relation to these categories. Going forward, what we did as a result of the work in the last year, a consortium was created of strategic lead organisations, and the current grant was awarded to the Bristol Advice Partnership. Performance of the current grant has been considerable. In the first 9 months, there was a total of 2,393,000 financial gain for clients for every £1 spent over the year. Citizens Advice calculates that clients benefit by £131. Sorry, I just lost my place. Okay, yeah. And a breakdown of the impact in the first 9 months of the grant can again be found in Appendix A. So today I'm asking that the Cabinet approves the extension of the grant funding plan using existing arrangements for IAG services for a maximum annual grant of £560,000 from the 1st of November 2020 to 30th of October 2021, with the option to extend for a further 2.5 years to the 30th of April 2024, and that the authority is delegated to the Executive Director of Resources in consultation with the Cabinet member with responsibility for communities to award the extended grant funding. Thank you.
Thanks, Asher. There are no public statements or forum statements or questions received on this. Does any other Cabinet members want to comment? Paul?
Yes, thank Asher for bringing this report and welcome it. And of course, one of the organisations that we fund, Talking Money, had its 30th birthday. Unfortunately, they mainly deal with debt advice. They decided to do that on the day of our budget meeting, which I don't know if there's any significance in that at all. But I just wanted, as a marker, just to say that there is another advice service funded within the city, which is the council's own Ramus service, which is the only service which actually delivers welfare benefit advice in people's own homes, and does a tremendous job in particularly supporting council tenants and others to ensure that they're getting the benefits that they're entitled to, that they're aware of the options of training and other things that can help people get back into work, and also supports people, particularly particularly people with disabilities, who are appealing against rather bizarre decisions to take their money from them. And Ramos is a full part of the ecosystem which Asha has described in her report. So if anything, this report understates the extent to which the council is funding welfare advice in the city, which is so crucial to so many people. And as I say, very much welcome the extension that's being proposed today.
Anyone else? No, I mean, I suppose I'd probably comment. What I like about this is the concept of the joined up approach. I think the problem, certainly when I was growing up, and you'd get, often it was provided by the council at the time, you'd get some advice or support on dealing with rental arrears, for example, but no one would think to ask you about your utility bills or whether you were entitled to any more benefits than what you were on and so on. So I think that joined up approach is essential. So can I hand over to you now, Asha, to take the decision which I support?
You can. Okay, so in making this decision, I have taken into consideration consultation responses and the equalities impact assessment in the report. And in terms of the decision to be made today, I approve of the recommendations as set out in the report.
Thank you, Asha. So up and agenda item 14, the future of Bristol's cemetery and crematorium provision, with a report that's seeking approval for capital funding for the expansion and improvements at South Bristol Cemetery and for feasibility work for the future cemetery and crematorium provision for the north of the city. Asha.
So it's not necessarily the sexiest part of my portfolio, but it's a very important part of my portfolio. So today's report in front of you is seeking approval of capital funding for the expansion and improvement at South Bristol Cemetery to undertake a feasibility work for future cemetery and crematoria provision for the north of the city. And to update the Cabinet on the strategic requirement in cemeteries and crematorium provision across the city. The Council owns 8 cemeteries within Bristol, 4 of which no longer accept new burials. Within the 4 remaining operational sites, there is a real shortage of burial space, which is becoming critical. This includes provision at South Bristol Cemetery and Canford Cemetery, which also houses the Council's 2 crematoriums. Investment at South Bristol Crematorium between 2012 and 13 included refurbishment of facilities, an extension of the car park, new cremators, and an installation of mercury abatement equipment. There has been no significant investment at Canford, at which cremators are now over 30 years old and do not presently abate mercury emissions. A significant amount of investment in the chapel and crematorium would be required to bring the provision up to the space, quality and technological requirements required of a modern bereavement service. In February 2019, a provision of £6 million was allocated on the capital programme for future investment in Bristol cemeteries and crematoria provision. The future provision is based on an average of 800 graves per acre and the rate of burials at 227 per year based on 2016-17 figures. Work is being undertaken to develop a concept stage proposal to extend South Bristol Cemetery, which has a forecast of 2 years of remaining burial space available, into adjacent agricultural fields owned by the council. The concept development looks at opportunities to improve the quality of the provision across the existing cemetery site and opportunities for development of the overall bereavement services offered within the 1.4 million budget set aside against works at South Bristol Cemetery as part of that £6 million capital programme. The extension of cemetery provision in North Bristol is complicated than at South Bristol Cemetery due to sites being landlocked by adjacent uses, and the provision of additional burial space needs to be considered in combination with the crematorium provision at Canford Cemetery to ensure that a best overall solution for providing bereavement services for this part of the city can be identified. This report recommends that a budget of £300,000 is allocated as part of the approved capital budget to undertake a detailed appraisal of feasibility options, and the remaining 3 million sum on the capital programme is an indicative allocation for the purposes of medium-term financial planning, and the feasibility work will determine the cost of works to deliver preferred options for meeting the future cemetery and crematoria requirements in North Bristol. The Cabinet recommendation is to approve 1.7 million capital expenditure, as I said, consisting of 1.4 for extension of burial provision at South Bristol Cemetery and 0.3 million for 300 million for undertaking feasibility and options appraisal. I'm seeking a delegation of authority to the Strategic Director for Growth and Regen in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Finance, Governance and Procurement and the Director of Finance to agree the final option to be implemented at South Bristol Cemetery once the concept stage has been completed, and to take programme and financial decisions within the budget envelope and scheme of delegation. And note that a further report will be brought back to Cabinet following completion of feasibility and business casework on North Bristol Cemetery and Crematorium provision. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Asha. We've had no public forum questions or statements. Can I ask any other Cabinet members if they'd like to speak to this? No, well, I am aware of a number of communities, particular communities approaching me, particularly Pakistani community recently, about the need for more space in cemeteries as well. So again, for many people, it won't be seen as the issue because it's one that hits us later in life, obviously, but there are some people it's an ongoing issue for. So, yeah, thank you very much for bringing this today. Let me hand back to you now to take the decision, which I fully support.
Thank you. So I just wanted to, the point is we will run out of space within 2 years in this city with our existing crematorium, so this is really important. So in making this decision, I've taken into consideration the equalities impact assessment in the report, and in terms of the decision to be made today, I approve the recommendations as set out in the report.
Thank you very much, Asha. So let's move on now to agenda item 15, commissioning of the reducing rough sleeping services. Paul.
Thank you, Marvin. Last year, I've just got the figures for last year, 1,230 people slept on the streets of Bristol at some point or another. 1,230. Last year, when I told you the figure, it was 951. And if you look in the report, you can see that the figures have been rising steadily over the last 3 years. If you look in the report, it looks like previous years they were higher, but what I'm told is that there was a lot of double counting in those figures over those years. It's only the last 3 years that we've had absolutely reliable numbers, but they're absolutely shocking numbers. Luckily, at any one night, there aren't 1,230 people on the streets because of the work being done by a whole range of agencies and the City Council to help people come off the streets. And, each year we become more successful, but each year we get more people coming on to our city streets to live, which is obviously something that's incredibly shameful. It's a direct result of the welfare reforms that we've had over the last 10 years, and also the austerity which has led to reductions in funding for support services in particular. And so this report brings forward a change to the structure of the rough sleeping services that we commission, based on talking to a large number of people who've actually received those services. And it's really important that when we shape the services, that we actually talk to the people with real lived experience of them, rather than just sort of taking an academic or a professional approach, although academic and professional approaches are great. But that we really, really do talk to the people who are affected by the services that we deliver. And so we've got a proposition here which has 4 elements to it. A lot more work around prevention. Most of the people who come onto our streets have been evicted by a private landlord. And so working upstream before they're evicted to see if we can stop that, if we can work with the landlord, or find somewhere else before somebody comes on the streets, is obviously much better than having to pick somebody up once they've come out. But also within that prevention service to try and move people off the streets as soon as we possibly can, because living on the streets, I guess it's obvious to everyone here, has a very detrimental impact on people's physical and mental health. And the longer people are on there, the more difficult it is to move them off and move them particularly back into permanent accommodation. Another thing that's difficult, the second strand, is actually more support for returners. Unfortunately, there are some people who come off the streets, they maybe come into the shelters, then into the hostels, then maybe get a flat, have difficulty sustaining that accommodation, then come back onto the streets again. And there's looking at some work specifically to deal with those people who end up going round and round the system, because it's not good for them and it's not good for the services that we're delivering. More work on resettlement, hopefully to make it there's the third strand to ensure that when people do get their own place, the support's in place so that they can actually cope with living in that accommodation. And then the fourth element is actually to look at increasing the amount of night shelters available within the city. Many of you will be aware of the 24-hour shelter at St Anne's, which we've run. Initially, a lot of concern within that community, but once it was up and running, the communities really rallied round that facility and helped with its management in raising funds for it and supporting the people within that shelter. Not saying it's always been easy, but I think it's been great to see the way that the people of Bridlington have rallied round. We're currently in early talks with another location to open another 24-hour shelter within the city. And we held a meeting recently with people from Bridlington where the sort of overwhelming view from that public meeting was that we could continue the existing shelter after the winter period so that it doesn't close down in the summer. It keeps going. And the importance of 24-hour facilities also is really important. The voluntary sector night shelters will push people out after breakfast, back onto the streets until they open again in the evenings because of the way that those facilities operate. And we had Paul, who came here with his petition around 24-hour support. So it is part of our plan to increase the amount of 24-hour support. So part of this report is both to commission this work, but also this weird thing where we have to agree to accept some of the government money that's been made available to us. And both of those things are within the recommendations. Obviously, I know that the government have plans to reduce the number of people on our streets. I think that's quite easy. If they want to reverse the housing benefit reforms, if they want to reverse the sanctions taken against people, 73% of the people who end up on the streets have got a mental health problem. And often can't manage within the benefit system, a draconian benefit system. If the government would like to reverse those things, as well as the promises they've made around putting more money into health, then they won't need to put money into a lot of these facilities because the number of people coming onto our streets will reduce massively. I think the other thing that's worth saying is that Bristol is a generous city. We heard about the fantastic work that's being done with refugees and asylum seekers and migrants earlier on. The city is also very supportive of people who find themselves homeless, and there's a lot of support services out there, a lot of voluntary support services, and the Mayor has been leading work on trying to ensure that the work that they do is better coordinated and directed. But what that does mean, and with Bristol being a city, is that although the majority of people who come onto our streets are from Bristol, there is a very significant proportion who come from outside. Some people think that that's a terrible thing, but I think that says something really, really positive about the sort of sanctuary that this city is for many of the most vulnerable people within the city, within the country, and as I said before, across the world. So I recommend this report to the Cabinet. Be interested in any comments that they have to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Now, we have had, again, no statements or questions on this issue of such critical importance. Can I offer it to any other Cabinet members to comment on this item? No. I mean, Anna.
Sure, I speak for everyone. I say that how much we support this, the impact it obviously has on all our areas of our portfolio. So, you know, needless to say, the impact on a family of even the risk of homelessness. And I think that probably with our kind of councillor hats on, we absolutely see the issues that are caused by not all private landlords, but by I get huge numbers of emails. We've dealt with something recently, haven't we, in a school in our ward, Craig, that are around last-minute evictions, basically, and the massive vulnerabilities we see there. So, yeah, it's certainly very welcome, I'm sure, for families across the city.
Can I also add? I think we're also Bristol sometimes is the victim of our own somewhat success in our policies. I mean, I had a conversation with a councillor in Gloucestershire, for example. I think we had an individual who was sleeping rough on a tent, actually across from here on College Green. And that person actually made a choice to sleep rough because they'd actually abandoned their home in Gloucestershire and had come to Bristol. And I was told that a few people who come to the city come here because we've got really good policies around sleeping rough as compared to other cities. And I'm not saying that is an advertisement for people to come here, but realistically that is, some people make the decision to actually come to the city because they know that they're going to get treated well through the services that we provide. And so to all intents and purposes, you know, it is not good that we've got such a high number of people sleeping rough on our streets, but it also does say a lot about the services and the support that we do provide. So, you know, thanks to you know, all of the teams in the council and our voluntary sector partners who provide a really good service. But yeah, we've got to do what we can to get these numbers down.
Thank you. And it's going on. And I think it's timely that this comes with the work on our refugee asylum seeker strategy as well. So what we have is the full breadth of the city's compassion. You know, we want to be ambitious, but we've got to do that with compassion, wherever people are coming from, whatever their circumstances. We want this to be a city in which people can find some hope and some support and an opportunity to turn their lives around. So thank you for this work in this area, Paul. I'm going to hand back to you now to take the decision which I support.
Thank you, Mark. Just picking up on the comments, of course, there are no families sleeping rough in Bristol. You know, we pick up every single family one way or another. There are no children on the streets of Bristol, which, you know, or this country generally, whereas you go to many other countries and you see that the homelessness situation there has reached such terrible proportions that children are on the streets. I think, you know, in the same way that we talked about, you know, people coming here from other countries as being assets to the city, and that's absolutely the case. And I probably would say that because my mother came here from Italy, is that also many of the homeless people who come here should also be seen as assets and not as, not a problem to us, but people that we need to help to integrate fully into the life of our city. And of course, in terms of the services that Asha talked about, a lot of them are delivered by very passionate volunteers within the city, alongside the services that we're talking about commissioning through this report. So I thank colleagues for their comments, and come back to this great bit of paper which says, in making this decision, I've taken into consideration the consultation responses and equalities relevance check in the report, and in terms of the decision to be made today, I approve the recommendations as set out in the report.
Thank you very much, Paul. So let's move speedily on now, having done that, to agenda item 16, land disposal at Bonnington Walk in Lockleaze. And this is back to you, Paul.
Yeah, I think the title of this report is very unfortunate. This is not a land disposal. This is the largest development of council housing that I've brought to this cabinet. It's the largest development of council housing on one site in Bristol for over 40 years. I mean, this is a fantastic. The 96 council homes will be built on one location is really important. Now we've tried to work with a whole range of different organisations over the decades to bring this site forward. 23 years this site has been allocated for housing. 23 years, nothing very much has happened. So this partnership with Legal and General Modular, I think, is a fantastic step forward. Despite all the discussions that we've had over the years, none of those have resulted in a single house being built on this site, or even a sort of realistic proposition for housing to be built on this site. This scheme that we've developed with them at the moment, it looks like it will be 188 homes, of which 96 will be council housing. The council will take out the planning permission, which will help to lock that level of affordable housing, that social housing, into the scheme. I think there's all sorts of advantages of the approach that we've taken here. It massively speeds up delivery in terms of getting the homes built, because these will be factory-built homes. It massively improves the environmental performance of the homes that we're building because of the way in which they're being built. For the housing revenue account, which is effectively commissioning this development, it means that it's Legal in General that take on the borrowing responsibilities within this. It massively reduces the need for us as the council to borrow, which therefore means we can use our borrowing capacity to build other council homes on other locations. It offers us great value for money in terms of the council housing that will be built and coming back to us. So, as I say, I don't like the title of this. The real title should be "Huge Boost for Council Housing in Lockleaze."
Sorry, I'm supposed to have picked up in the introduction to there, Paul, that there was an error in the report. The capital cost is 1.5 million from the HRA development budget. So apologies for not making that clear at the front end. So we had one public statement and 4 questions on this item. So the first public statement is from Rob Dixon. Okay, so let's go to public forum questions. David Wilcox. Okay, public question, Heather Mack. Public question, Susan Wilson.
Hi, thank you. I'm Suzanne. I run Lockleaze Neighbourhood Trust, a community organisation in Lockleaze. And for those of you that don't know this area, it's kind of to the, I think, east of the railway line, and it's a route that's really well used by particularly people cycling to MOD and those kind of North Bristol employment areas, but it's also used a lot by local residents, kind of dog walking, wandering around, and there's a community orchard there as well. And so when this, about 6 months ago, this sort of first came out as a development, there was a lot of concern and a lot of residents had got engaged in that discussion. And I think it's to the real credit of the residents of Lockleaze that there was a really balanced discussion in which, whilst there are some people that say, there's a really beautiful green space with, you know, lovely birdsong and quiet, and you would never know that Filton Avenue kind of rush hour traffic is herring past a few hundred
I just want to encourage you to move to the question because of the
Sure,
time. Okay, because you generally get about a minute. Okay.
But a lot of people recognise the need for housing locally, and so there's been a tremendous amount of engagement in the consultation and in the planning. And so the disposal of this land, which doesn't allow any of those conditions to be maintained, create some measure of concern. And so my question is, to what extent do those measures and changes from the original 250 homes to about 178 and various kind of ecological improvements can be guaranteed once the sale of this land has happened?
Okay, all of those things can be guaranteed. And I see things like the environmental quality of the spaces there, the cycle path, all being great selling points. You know, we want to enhance those, investment in the orchard, also some community facilities on site as well. What guarantees them is the council will be getting the planning permission. So the council will be taking responsibility for all of those things before it goes over to legal and general modular to actually put the housing on the site. So we're not selling the land for it to be developed. What we're doing, first of all, and we'll be doing it with the community, and we do fund the Lockleaze Neighbourhood Trust to run consultation with residents to ensure that those absolutely correct concerns and demands of the local community are met. So we're not washing our hands of this site, and we will be managing over half of the homes built here. So we will also have an ongoing interest, and we want the housing that we build in this city, our new council housing, to be the best housing within the city in the best setting, because we want a setting, for instance, which enhances people's mental and physical health. And that means ensuring that there are lots of trees there, that we enhance the space, that cycle path actually is improved, and all the things you mentioned are protected.
If I could ask a supplementary to that then,
You
would
can.
you consider a tree preservation order on the category B trees on the site, particularly the ginkgo, oak, maples, fruit trees?
But what we're doing, we're working with our tree officer at the moment, and we'll come back to talk to the community in more detail about which trees are protected and what new planting there is in that area. But it is our intention to protect as many of the important trees there as possible, and to plant new. I mean, every development that we undertake, we want to increase the amount of tree cover as a result of that development. And also, you know, at the last cabinet meeting, we declared an ecological emergency. We also want to ensure that developments include habitats and wildlife corridors and bird boxes and all those other things to ensure that we're creating a rich habitat, not just for human beings, but for a whole range of animal and insect life as well.
Thank you. We now have a councillor question from Councillors Jill Kirk and Estella Tinknell.
Thank you. I wonder whether there was a second question from Suzanne before I go to that.
Oh.
Sorry,
Oh, right, okay,
Yeah.
we can go to your second
Thank
supplementary,
you.
Suzanne.
My second question was about a local lettings policy, because there is a number of people in housing need in Lockleaze, some of whom would like to downsize, and there aren't any 1 and 2 bed properties available, and some of whom are overcrowded. So for your 96 odd council homes, if you would consider a local lettings policy.
So, I mean, I think the point you raise that underline that is also really important, that we don't want to build when we talk about mixed and balanced communities, that means looking at areas where if there aren't much 1 and 2 bedroom properties, to bring that in. And there will be 1 and 2 bedroom properties within this development, so that there's a greater mix of housing in Lockleaze, so that people who want to downsize or upsize, that there are options for them. So we have a local lettings policy that we apply to council housing at the moment. So that would apply to the 96 council homes here, the 80 at Romney, and the other ones that we're building closer to the centre of Lockleaze. So over 200 new council homes coming into the area. We will apply 50% local lettings to that, and would encourage people in Lockleaze who aren't already on home choice, who have a housing need, whether it's to downsize, to upsize, to just move to a different property, to come on to home choice, so that they're ready and on there and through the system by the time that these homes start becoming available, because we want to ensure that local people, in an incredibly local sense, actually benefit from this new housing. And Lockleaze is probably getting at the moment the biggest injection of council housing in the whole of the city, and it might be that we end up with more homes than we're able to accommodate through that 50% rule. That'd be over 100 homes, which will be guaranteed first choice for local people. The other thing to say is that we're currently in a consultation around lettings within the city, both by councils and the housing associations. And I would encourage anybody who's got an interest in these issues to respond to that consultation, so that we can lock these in as standard policies as a result of the work that we're doing around asking who, given the large amount of new development that we're committed to. At last cabinet meeting, we approved development for 900 new council homes across the city. The question is who best should benefit from that, and that includes the opportunity to promote local lettings policies.
Okay, so this time, let's go to your question. Councillor Kirk, Estella Tinknell.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I just want to say that we're very pleased to see these proposals moving forward for the very much desperately needed affordable housing in Lockleaze, having lost so much of the old council housing stock. And also this will be very interesting innovation in seeing the modern methods of construction. My actual question is probably very similar to the one we had just now, but it was just, again, a query or just a little bit more information about how, whether a local lettings policy would apply and how that might work. But Paul, I feel you may have covered quite a bit of that in the previous question.
Yeah, just to reiterate, we feel that local people should benefit from new housing development, and I'm sure through your work as a councillor and working with the Neighbourhood Trust, that you will be encouraging people in Lockleaze who want to move to a different home to come on to home choice, and that those who are on home choice to get ready to start bidding as these homes become available, so we can maximise the benefit to the existing Lockleaze community. Obviously, we have a huge housing need within the city, and we've got over 500 families in temporary accommodation. So I'm sure that also that the people of Lockleaze will be welcoming new people into their community as well. And that as a result of all of the developments going on in Lockleaze, obviously it will be a bigger community with more people within it, and I hope a much richer community for that.
Supplementary, Jill?
Yes, it is really. One of the things it's slightly a comment and also a question. I think it's very important that people understand the council does still have involvement in the delivery of these homes. And as you say, the land disposal is not just washing our hands of it. I just wonder whether there's any way that message can be, heightened a little bit more, so that people do understand how this partnership works, in a sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and hopefully we can get that message out through the Neighbourhood Trust and the local councillors and the MP and other people who are providing advice in that area, so that they're aware of that. And we'll, the council is, happy to come out and meet and talk to people and to continue to engage with the community through the development process. Here, a partnership with Legal in General, obviously with Gorham Homes and with Direct Council House Building. And also, hopefully, housing built through the Neighbourhood Trust as well, so community-led housing. So we're not walking away from Lockleaze. Our involvement engagement will increase and improve. So yes, we will continue to do that, and we'll try and make sure that message gets out. And hopefully one day the way in which we head these reports will reflect much more effectively what we're actually trying to achieve here. As I said, the biggest council house development on one site in the city for over 40 years.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Any other Cabinet members to comment on this item? Well, it's council housing delivery. It's what, in the face of our housing crises, that is not gone anywhere. We still have huge numbers of people on waiting list, and one of the priorities, as you led this city gathering report, was to reduce the number of households in temporary accommodation as well this year. So delivering more genuinely affordable homes for people, and we mean affordable in the realist sense of the word, remains a priority. In terms of some of the challenges that were raised earlier, as well, at the last Environment and Sustainability Board, where we launched the climate strategy and then launched the work to write the ecological strategy, one of the decisions made was to hold a joint meeting with the Homes and Communities Board as well, to talk about what does good development look like in Bristol, and what does development look like that actually, in the first priority, heals the planet, right? So we're making decisions that makes life better, increases biodiversity. For example, we get the net gain. But if that can't be done, how do we minimise harm in all instances? There's a price to be paid for rapid urbanisation. So that meeting, I think the ES board that will be reaching out to the Homes board to have that joint session. There was a fantastic forerunner to that between the Health and Wellbeing board and the Homes and Communities board just a while ago, looking at housing and mental health. And we're looking at these interdependent issues right across the piece, which is what the city office really allows us to do in a really developed way. So that's coming. So a lot of these challenges over land use, and the impact on the planet will be worked through there in a really strong way. So let me hand back to you now, Paul, to take the decision, which I support.
Yeah, I'd like to thank the Neighbourhood Trust in the way that they've worked with on this, and also responding to your comments, Marvin, is that in building new council housing, I think it's really important, I know you do as well, that we show leadership, and leadership is also about showing what can be achieved in terms of our carbon commitments, our ecological commitments, as well as affordable housing and quality. I think we want to be in a position, certainly with the council moving to being the largest residential developer in the city, that we can point to our developments and say to the private sector, why can't you do it as well as this? So in making, and make sure I've got the right one, in terms of the decision to be made today, I approve the recommendations as set out in the report.
Thank you, Paul. Very good news item there. So let's move on now to agenda item 17, the delivery of heat networks for Bedminster and Temple. Kai, you have this.
Thank you, Marvin. Another good news story here. But I think first of all, I'd just like to reference the One City Climate Strategy and just say and put on record how important decarbonising heat is and how important it is to reaching that 2030 goal. So currently, 40% of Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, CO2 emissions, that's from transport and energy, come from heat. So that's heat for your home and hot water. Now that's the largest source of direct emissions in the city. So I just want to re-emphasise that. So heat is the largest source of direct emissions in the city. Now we've been quite good as a city since 2005 around insulation and cavity wall insulations, that kind of thing, to improve the efficiency of properties. And we've seen the reduction of CO2 emissions from heat reduced by 29% since 2005. That's good, but if we're going to hit the 2030 carbon neutrality target, we need to go a lot further. And to do that, one of the solutions, or one of the key solutions, is district heating systems or heat networks. A lot of people might not know what they are, but essentially it's a network of pipes in the ground that distributes hot water around the city, and there's a connection to a building, an office block, a block of flats, or in some circumstances a housing estate. And it basically means you don't need individual boilers all over the city with the inefficiencies of the requirements to have individual heating systems across the city. It's very popular in Scandinavian countries, so I think most of the heat in Copenhagen comes from heat networks, and it's popular in other Scandinavian countries like Sweden. We have invested recently in over the recent years in a couple of heat networks. We've got the Bishport Fives in Hartcliffe, so we've got 5 blocks of flats there connected to a heat network. And in my own ward, we've got the Redcliffe heat network, where we've got 1,000 social housing properties connected to that network at the moment. So what this report is looking to do is to invest in and develop and design and build the Temple heat network, and look at design and development of the new Bedminster heat network as well. The Temple heat network will supply low carbon heat to new developments that are being built in the Temple and St Philip's area of the city. It will make use of waste heat generated from the new University Bristol Temple Quarter campus, because that site has got a large requirement for cooling. So what this project is doing is looking at capturing all the waste heat that's generated from that cooling process to provide hot water and heating along that Temple and St Philip's heat network that we want to develop. And in Bedminster, this is quite interesting. We're looking at developing a heat network in Bedminster for the new developments that are coming forward around there, and also looking at providing heat for the South Bristol swimming pool as well, where I believe the energy centre that will distribute that will be located. What we're looking at as well is taking waste heat from sewers, and we're talking to Wessex Water on that, about taking heat from the sewers to generate the heat that we need to provide that hot water and heating for the residential and office blocks that are being developed in that area. But also, interestingly, taking heat from mine workings in the area that haven't been in use for well over 100 years now, and we're currently in discussions with the coal board about taking that waste heat from those mine workings that sort of built Bristol and developed Bristol that haven't been used for 100 years to now help us decarbonise the city going forward to 2030. If this report's approved, which I hope it will be, the council will bid for £5.2 million of central government grant funding to develop and build out these projects. So another good news story alongside the Old Market heat network that came in September, where we will be taking water from the docks, from the floating harbour, to provide heat to the Old Market heat network, and that was a £7 million investment, and it's going to be the largest water source heat pump in England, and that is a totally carbon neutral source of heat. So very important that we, as I said, decarbonise heat, the biggest source of CO2 emissions in the city. In the One City Climate Strategy, it's identified that there's potentially about 160,000 boilers in the city, and we think we need 65,000 connections to district heating systems and heat networks, and also we need to look at individual properties where that's not possible, and we estimate that that's probably looking at 95,000 air source heat pumps or ground source heat pumps to provide low carbon, zero heat and hot water to properties that aren't appropriate to go on to a district heating system. So, yeah, once again, very good news, good investment. We've got a good track record of investing in energy infrastructure over the recent years. So £14 million in last year's capital budget. So again, in terms of delivering carbon neutrality, decarbonising the energy system, I think we've got a good record. We need to go a lot further. That's why we've got other projects like the City Leap Energy Programme. That's going to really upscale the level of intervention that's required. And also alongside this, it's important to note that, you know, at the moment there's a lot of gas fitters, gas engineers, a lot of people with skills that maybe over 10, 15 years are going to disappear. It's very important that we retrain those people, upskill those people, that we have the right apprenticeships going forward to obviously provide the new skills that are going to be needed going forward. So I commend this report. Thank you.
Thanks, Kai.
Clap. You've got a picture.
Yeah, it's a fantastic piece of work you've been leading on. It's real, and it's incredibly encouraging to. I mean, we're not in some kind of silly competition, but it is a gauge of where we are at to talk about this being the largest, having the largest heat pump in England as well. Just puts us on that in that table. We've had no public forum or statements on this one. But can I offer it to any of the Cabinet members who'd like to comment? Helen?
Well, as the recipient of the first heat network in the Bishoport Fives in my ward in Hartcliffe, and I've just been glancing back at the Cabinet report, which was 2014 when that was agreed, and making the case for having innovative heat energy delivery to some of the poorest people. I remember at the time doing that. And of course, yes, it replaced 3 very large gas boilers that heated the 5 blocks with the one system, but also it was aimed at those people who quite often pay the most for their energy, especially people who've defaulted on energy bills in the past and then have a prepayment meter. So it was absolutely the right thing to do then, and I support the extension of it now.
Thank you. Paul?
I mean, this is so important in decarbonising our council housing stock and housing and commercial properties in particular. I mean, it's excellent to see this report here. And in a sense, it's sort of, it can't help feeling it's what local government is for, you know, building infrastructure. If you look at the work in this city done, you know, building sewers in the Victorian period, it was that sort of spirit of local government which was so important in terms of driving improvements in health in the city. And I think building this infrastructure, you know, I think we're very lucky with the officer team that we've got leading this to actually build a new heat infrastructure and a carbon neutral structure in the city. I think just shows really what local government can do and can do really well. And sometimes when people are complaining about roads in the centre of Bristol being dug up at the same time that all sorts of other services are being put down, that we're putting in the infrastructure for the heat networks to expand it, I think is a fabulous thing and should be celebrated more. Well done, Kai.
Thanks very much. Any other Cabinet members? I'm coming back to you in a sec. Okay, well, in the absence of that, I won't add to it. It's all been said. Let me hand back to you, Kai, to take the decision, so I fully support, and make any final comments.
Yeah, thanks for all the comments there. Yeah, I do think you know, these interventions are very important in terms of tackling fuel poverty as well. And the heat network in Redcliffe did deliver massive savings for people. And in fact, we did have I had people who came to my councillor surgery with their energy bills, complaining about their bills, and I was scratching my head about what, you know, your bills come down by almost 50%, and you're here complaining. It took me a while to work out what they were complaining about, and it was the fact that their bill had been cut so much they must have been overcharged before. So that's what they came to complain about. So it's like an interesting story I always tell. So you've probably heard that one before, have you?
It's a good one, Kai. It's a good story.
Yeah. You forget sometimes, don't you? Right. Okay. So, and the other thing I'd like to place on record my thanks to the Energy Service here, who do fantastic work around innovation. We've got some great people working there. Looking, as I said, I don't know if many other cities are looking at taking heat from sewers and looking at old mine workings for decarbonising the energy system. So my thanks go on record to them. So back to the decision. In making this decision, I've taken into consideration the equalities impact assessment in the report, and in terms of the decision to be made today, I approve the recommendations as set out in the report.
Thank you very much, Kai. Let's stay, for agenda item 18, we're staying with Bristol Heat Networks and the establishment of 2 special purpose vehicles. Now, this item does contain an exempt appendix, so Cabinet members are reminded to indicate if they wish to discuss any information in exempt session, in which case we'll move to exempt session. But Kai, if you want to take this report away.
Thank you. No, I won't tell the same story again, but this report seeks the approval for the creation of a special purpose vehicle company required to receive grant funding from the Heat Network Investment Project for the continued development of the Bristol Heat Network programme. Bristol City Council were successful in applying for a combined total of £10.2 million from the Heat Network Investment Project grant funding for Redcliffe and the Old Market networks. The Old Market allocation will support the installation of a new key phase of the city centre-wide provision of low-carbon heat. It will fund the new network and installation of an energy centre supplying heat to a number of new commercial buildings, residential blocks and a school. The Redcliffe network allocation will fund expanding the existing network, which, as I mentioned previously, has been in operation since 2016, and the installation of a second low-carbon energy centre supplying heat to a number of new commercial developments. The reason we're doing this is not that we want to set up SPVs all over the place. It's that it's a condition of the grant funding that we set up a special purpose vehicle to receive the funding, and if we don't, we'll have to return the £10.2 million. So it's quite an easy one, really, quite a simple one. It's worth doing, obviously, to get that extra investment into the heat network. I've obviously gone into great detail in the previous paper about why that's important, so I think I'll leave it there. So the basic reason is we'd have to hand back the money if we didn't do this.
Okay, no public forum statements or questions. Cabinet members to comment?
I will, if I can. I think probably the fact that we were successful in this bid is one of the first, I think, in the country. Only really re-emphasises the point Kai made earlier that the energy services team in Bristol City Council is probably the greatest energy services team in the country, and it's often recognises that, and we are leading the way here. And you can't underestimate what a difference that they will make to the future of this city. So I just want to make a big thank you to David White and the team for all that they do.
Kai, well, let me hand back to you now to take the decision which I support.
Cheers, thank you. In making this decision, I've taken into consideration the equalities impact assessment in the report, and in terms of the decision to be made today, I approve the recommendations as set out in the report.
Thank you, Kai. So, agenda item 19, Bristol Highways Asset Management and Associated Works Framework. This is with you again, Kai. Another very helpful and catchy title.
Thank you, Marvin. This Cabinet report seeks approval for the tendering process of the Council's Bristol Highways Asset Management and Associated Works Framework 2021 to 2025. This is a framework type contract which will cover specialist maintenance work that we require, ranging from surfacing, footway and cycle schemes, structures repairs, and general highway maintenance and transport delivery projects. It's anticipated, the anticipated spend under this framework is approximately 70 million, obviously over the lifetime, and will be sourced from various highway capital and revenue grants as they are awarded. Please note that this is a non-committal contractual arrangement whereby the authority is not legally obliged to spend any amount, and it shall only do so if and when funds are made available for individual projects or programmes of work. Maintaining the city's highways asset is not only essential to meet, it's obviously one of our statutory obligations as a local authority to do so. Improving the condition of our roads and footway will ensure we are a well-connected city, linking people with jobs and services that they need, and linking them to the transport connections that they need to use. A better surface free from defects will also encourage our residents to walk and cycle more and improve the well-being and help us to meet our carbon neutral climate change objectives, and also improve safety to the highways assets. The framework is obviously done under our social value policies, and I think it's important to note that in accordance with our procurements and the frameworks that we use, that obviously the living wage will be part of any contracts awarded to obviously staff that are employed on those projects in line with our current procurement practices. Thank you.
Thanks, Kai, for that. So we've had one public statement, but I'm already told that person's not here. Can I ask any of the Cabinet members if they'd like to comment on this one? Okay. Well, let me hand back to you now, Kai, to take the decision which I support.
Paperwork all over the place. Thank you, Marvin. In making this decision, I've taken into consideration the Equalities Impact Assessment in the report, and in terms of the decision to be made today, I approve the recommendations as set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. Very much. So on to agenda item 20, Budget Monitoring Outturn Report P10. Craig.
Thanks, Marvin. This is a report just for noting, so I won't particularly dwell on it, although I will, and I'm sure Cabinet have already read it. I would just point out, though, that we're currently forecasting a general fund overspend of £6.6 million, and so the underlying causes of that, I've 6.5 million in people, 0.8 in resources, offset by a 0.7 underspend in growth and regen. It'd be not particularly surprising to know that the majority of the overspend is in adult social care, and we've well rehearsed this conversation, so I won't particularly go over it again. In terms of the other accounts, we've got a 2 million underspend projected in the housing revenue account, a 1.1 million overspend in the DSG, the dedicated schools grant, a 0.1 million overspend on the public health grant. That's probably all I need to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Craig. There were no public forum statements or questions. Any comments from Cabinet on this item? Okay, so I'll hand back to you now, Craig, to actually, I know you haven't got to make a decision on this. Okay, my script is there. Okay, well, we're just for noting that item. So we're changing the order of the agenda today, and we're going to bring forward items 23 and 24 to obviously, we've got an item to go into exempt session after this. So agenda item 23, Council Homes Regeneration. And this report sets out the proposed strategic delivery approach of the Council's emerging estate regeneration programme. And obviously, Paul, you're going to lead on this one.
Okay, thank you, Marvin. I sometimes get asked by our tenants who don't think that they'll get one of the new houses we're building is all very well building these lovely new homes that are energy efficient and lovely design, everything else, winning awards. But what about the crappy house I'm in or the crappy flat I'm in? What are you going to do about that? And it is really important that we do, when we're looking at our building programme and our housing programme, that we don't ignore the homes that we already have. 28,000 homes, of which about 1,000 are leasehold within the city. And we are looking at the moment of all of, as it says in the report, using the SHAPE tool. We're looking at hard data, like how much will it cost to make a home carbon neutral? what are the repair costs going to be over the next 30 years, and other investment we might have to put into that property. But also looking at the soft data, you know, the information, for instance, like to what extent is the design contributing to antisocial behaviour, how popular are properties with our tenants, particularly looking at things like the extent to which people, when they move in, very quickly want to go on to home choice to move out again. We often quote that there are 13,000 households on home choice. About 3,500 of those are our own tenants wanting to move from their property that they're in to another property. So there's been a lot of work being done on improving properties through relet and through our planned programmes, but in many respects, because of the reductions in funding to the council over many years, we've really been at best treading water and at worst papering over the cracks of some of our properties. So what this report sets out is an approach which is about saying that for many of our properties, the way we get, for example, to carbon neutrality and improving the energy efficiency of our homes is by retrofitting them, is going in, putting in more insulation, changing their heating systems to heat pumps or connecting to heat networks. But for some of our properties, to make them safe and secure and also energy neutral, it's not possible within the finances that we've got, or it is possible, but it's not sensible. So what this programme says is that in some instances, we will need to rebuild some of the housing that we've got. And so this report sets out the framework for that. It talks about estates, but estate could be quite a small area. It could be a small block of flats. But what we're doing is saying the housing that we've got, some of it has reached the end of its natural life. We've got some very poor quality housing that was thrown up in the 1950s when we had that post-war housing crisis, which is beyond economic repair and continuation. So what we will be looking at in some instances is building new council housing where existing council housing is. Now, some of the guarantees that we make within this report is if we look at an area and decide that we want to take down that housing, there will first of all be quite a lot of engagement with the existing residents, tenants and leaseholders, and there will be a ballot. And so that at the end of that engagement process, if the tenants vote against our proposition, it won't continue. And what that means is that we have to come up with a really good offer to people in those properties to ensure that they have got real support and that there's meaningful engagement, because we are giving the residents effectively a veto. The second guarantee, which I think is really important, is that when we do this, there will be at least as many council social rented housing in those developments as there are now. Obviously, our aspiration would be to increase the numbers, but and you know, I'm hopeful that we will be able to do that. But we will at least guarantee that we replace like for like, and unlike some of the regeneration schemes that we've seen in central London and some other cities, where effectively the regeneration has been more an exercise in social cleansing and financial land grab, that we're actually replacing social housing with social housing, but with much better quality social housing, and social housing which is much cheaper to run. And the third thing we want to do is ensure that whenever we do this, we don't just think about the properties that we're looking at, but we think about the impact that will have on the wider community. It comes back to some of the points that were made in an earlier item about, for instance, is the property mix right within that area? Do we need more one-bedroom properties, for example, to meet the need of people who want to downsize? But are we also looking at local labour and training? Are we looking at the impact of what we will do on local shops and other local facilities, so that we don't, by improving the housing, degrade the community. So on that basis, I recommend this report to the Cabinet.
Thanks very much, Paul. So we have one councillor statement and two councillor questions. Councillor statement from Joe Sargent. Not here. Okay. So councillor questions, one from Don Alexander.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a fair bit of it's being covered. I'm councillor, one of the councillors for Avonmouth and Lawrence Weston. And particularly, oh yes, there's three of us. I'll say hello afterwards. There's quite a lot of Lawrence Weston is housing revenue account area, not just the housing, the parks, the verges, you know, and some areas they do need a pretty thorough redesign. And I could spend quite a lot of time going around looking at damp and looking at things, but even parking, the areas of grass, the way it works doesn't work. Gardens that can be accessed from only through someone else's garden. And you pointed to a consultative process, which is kind of the question I was going to ask. And I guess as a local councillor, if I continue to be that, I do commit myself to getting out and about to people and explaining how really important this is. Where retrofitting is going to work, that's fine. But in some places, we've really got to bite the bullet, and us councillors have got to get out there and say to people what the cost of not really engaging on this is for the not just themselves, for their children, but for the whole community, I think. Thank you. I feel reassured.
Thanks, Don. Did you want to come back?
Well, I'm not quite sure what the question was, but I think the point that Don's...
You answered it,
the point that Don's making is really important also to say. I mean, one of the fantastic things about Lawrence Weston, of course, is the very active and proactive role of Ambition Lawrence Weston and what that does to engage people, but also the way it's engaged within the planning process to think about what Lawrence Weston could be. And it'd be great to see, I mean, we've got similar activities going on in Lockleaze and Southmead and Knoll West, to see that happening in more areas. And maybe in some of the smaller, what might be considered the smaller estates, this process could be a catalyst for getting people to say, you know, if we're going to redesign the area where you live in, you know, how can we best do that? Addressing a whole range of the issues you've raised, and also going back to the, you know, how do we ensure that what we do enhances our impact on the climate, enhances our impact on the ecology and on people's mental and physical health. That, you know, one of the beauties of the One City approach is that it actually forces us, not that we need it, but forces us and others to look at that wide range, that holistic range of things when we're actually dealing with these estate regenerations, but that we do it fundamentally with the consent of the existing population.
Thanks, Paul. We did have another question, but the councillor's not with us. So on the basis of that, can I offer it to any Cabinet? Helen.
Thanks very much, Marvin, and this gives me the opportunity to link both my ward hat and my portfolio, because we all know that some of the elderly preferred and sheltered housing blocks that we've got aren't high on people's lists of where they want to move, that we've had to, in some cases, get a mix of tenants that hasn't worked because of the unpopularity of some of those schemes. Some of them are very wasteful about the land that they use, and we could actually get far better, as Don has said, far better use of that land. And so I think the opportunity for adult social care to work with housing to make sure that we get that generational mix in our communities, that it's close to facilities, all of those kinds of things are really, really important. And so I think some of the important bits in here in the kind of small print is that commitment to being able to say to people very clearly, you will be able to live in the replacement facilities, which will be 1,000,000 times better than where you're living now. And also that we're guaranteeing not to keep moving people on from one place to the other while we decant people, while new homes are built. But I just think it's a fantastic opportunity for us to work across adult social care and housing.
Any others? Kai?
Yeah, just want to say I welcome this. Obviously, in my ward, our ward, there's some estates that, when they were built, they're award-winning. They won architectural awards, and they've kind of created great communities. But there's other examples of where it's created some of the designs have created a negative atmosphere and actually hinder a community coming together. And I think it's really important that we look at that as well, about how do we, through decent design, create communities so people interact with each other and they don't live isolated lives within the same building. So, very much welcome this, and obviously from a financial point of view, it really adds up as well if you take into account, as you said, the maintenance costs over a number of years.
Thanks. Asha?
Yeah, it just makes so much sense. I always say, we're not just building housing, we're building communities. And, what's really important is that when we are looking at the new regeneration, estate regeneration program, that we're kind of building in everything, kind of parks, green spaces, communities, intergenerational, you name it, we need to do it. So, and I do like the fact that, the community will have the final say at the end of the day. Like, as you said, if they don't like it, and I'm sure they shouldn't not like living in better accommodation, but at least they have the choice. So thanks for bringing this to Cabinet.
Okay, thank you. Any final comments, Paul, just before we record that we note the report?
Yeah, I'd like to thank the Cabinet members for their comments, which I think are very helpful. I must admit there are some parts of our estate where it's like we try to design crime in and make places as inhospitable, I can't even get it out, as possible, and we need to learn from that and to change that. I also think Helen's point, in terms of Helen's point, to say that our sheltered housing is tired is actually a massive understatement. Some of it is long past its sell-by date. The way in which it was developed, in the 60s for the active elderly, people are living much longer. Their needs have changed to the generations that it was originally envisaged for. I think there's huge opportunity here for providing extra care and intergenerational housing to allow both people who live in the existing sheltered housing, but people who might want to downsize from houses into new forms of housing is really important. And an opportunity to do that in close proximity to health and retail and other social facilities that people need. And that, when talking about those wider needs of the community, I think that's one of the things that very much that we're thinking about.
Thanks, Paul. So Cabinet will note the recommendations as set out in this report, and thanks for all the work on this. So agenda item 24 is the joint local transport plan 4, which is a non-key. And this report is to note the joint local transport plan 4 prior to adoption by the West of England Joint Committee on the 20th of March 2020. The decision to adopt the JLTP 4 will be made by the West of England Joint Committee. Bristol City Council does not make the decision to adopt, but is a statutory consultee only. The change in role occurred when WECA, the West of England Combined Authority order, transferred the local transport plan function to the of the council to the WECA mayor. The Metro Mayor adopts the plan for WECA, and the joint committee was established to approve the JLTP so as to include North Somerset Council as well as the West of England Combined Authority members. Bristol City Council has been actively involved in creating the JLTP along with the other authorities and as a statutory consultee. So following the consultation of the statutory consultation, therefore, the JLTP will now be considered by the Joint Committee. So Kai, can I hand all over to you? Thank you.
Thanks, Marvin. Thanks for making that clear. And obviously, this is a report for noting here. obviously the adoption is done elsewhere. It is a statutory document. This is quite an important document. And also, since the consultation, obviously the draft report went out with the consultation. There have been improvements to that, a bigger emphasis on action around the climate emergency, closer alignment with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and obviously we need this document in regards to servicing the future housing growth that's expected. 105,000 new homes expected over the next 16 years, 82,000 jobs, and obviously we need something that deals with the number of transport challenges that we've got going forward. What I want to do, though, is to put on record in my position on this report, and also the position of the administration, is that for us this is an interim report, and it needs to be reviewed straight away. The evidence base that informed this report is looking at evidence that's quite old now, 5-10 years ago. Some of the evidence is from, and we think it needs a much more closer focus on tackling the climate emergency. During the process, Bristol, within the meetings, has been at the forefront of pushing public transport interventions around the bus deal, the mass transit proposal, and also pushing forward the local cycling, walking and improvement plan. So the question might be, well, why are we supporting it? The simple answer is that we need an evidence base, we need documentation to go to government to attract funding to some of the good stuff that is in the report. If we didn't have this, we'd have to rely on the previous incarnation, or we could wait maybe another year, another 2 years to develop a new strategy. So I think the view we've taken in Bristol is that we view this as an interim report that needs to be reviewed straight away to make sure that the current priorities are met within some of the schemes that are mentioned. There are a number of good things in the report, I might add. Obviously the bus deal and the improvements that we're looking to make to bus priority across the city. That report came to this cabinet meeting where we're looking at 10 routes across the city where we improve bus priority to a highly significant level, and in return the bus company will double the frequency of buses on the routes where we do that. So that's, I think, something very important that we need to make sure we've got an anchor to attract funding against it. We've got the mass transit proposal, which is very important to the city and the region, and it's something that we've mentioned many times. If it should have been done 30-40 years ago, to have a system like that in Bristol that other cities have got, Manchester, Nottingham, places like that. We've seen from all the evidence that it makes sense in Bristol, the economic indicators against the project, the geology, the physical feasibility of it. It does make sense to pursue that, and that's in the report. We've obviously got the delivery of the local cycling, walking and improvement plan. We've got innovation in there around future mobility zones and mobility stations, which we're looking to pilot in Bristol. And there's other interventions around expanding the freight consolidation centre, because I think often how goods and services move around the city, how deliveries are made, are often underestimated in terms of transport. When people are thinking about transport, they think about buses, trains, how people move around, but equally how goods move around the city, how we do that in a low carbon and a carbon neutral way is very important. We've got a successful freight consolidation centre. We've got a freight consolidation centre that needs to be more widely used. It needs to be expanded, so we have those goods that we need to get around the city moving in a better way. There's proposals around expanding EV charging through the Go Ultra Low West project, and there's other innovation around projects like Mini Hollands, which we'd want to pilot in Bristol. Recently went on a study tour to Waltham Forest to see what they've done there, and it's something that we want to take forward in Bristol. So although it's not perfect, the alternatives were probably worse, relying on information that's 15 years old with the JLTP free, or we take another year or two to come up with a new plan, and we lose all that time in the interim, when we could be getting on with some of the projects that I've talked about and attracting funding into some of the projects that I was talking about. I know there's a number of statements on this, so I'm quite happy to hand over to the public gallery or the councillors in the room to obviously have their say. Yeah, thank you, Marvin.
Thank you very much, Kai. So we have 28 statements and 2 questions received. So the first public statement. So I'm going to have to be strict on timings for this today, for the statements, because we have so many. So I'm going to put my stopwatch on here. So the first one is from Dave Redwell.
But you've got to have a joint local transport plan. Let's be absolutely clear. If you want government money for transport, not having a joint local transport plan is a disaster. Now, obviously, there's many things in this plan that will draw down extra money from government, like Metro West, the rail projects, like the bus projects, like Metro Bus, and expansion of the walking and cycling proposals in the city. There are, of course, many rural road schemes that some of us, if you look at today, probably wouldn't have there, and those are mainly in the North Somerset and Baines area, to be fair. But without a plan, we can't draw money. And remember, we're competitive. Remember, we're against the North and the Midlands. Without the plan, we can't draw the cash. And we want to improve that bus network with First Group and Stagecoach. We want to make sure we get the Severn Beach line improved. We want to make sure we get Portishead line open. We want to make sure we get the Henbury Loop.
Just 10 seconds, Dave.
Okay. And we want to make sure we get a light rail rapid transit system like they've got in other cities in the UK. Without this, we actually go forward. Otherwise, you go back 15 years and we've got no plan. So we have to move forward, but we need to revise with a new plan in the future quite quickly. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dave. Appreciate that. Alan Morris. Okay, Faye Dicker. James Mee. Can you just wait for the microphone so we can hear you on the podcast as well? Thank you. So you got a minute, okay, James?
Okay, so there's some really good and some really worrying proposals in there. Both Bristol and Wecker have declared a climate emergency, but this transport plan includes proposals to build 10 new roads and widen 5 more. This would further erode the green belt, impact biodiversity, and would increase pollution and carbon emissions. There's a big mismatch here. Please, can the report be amended in respect to these roads? Critically, the excellent One City climate strategy risks being sabotaged by these changes. The stated aim is increasing connectivity for public transport, but these road changes will favour motorists. It's a truth universally acknowledged that the more available capacity on the roads, the more cars will be on the roads. Also, with expansion of Bristol Airport being rejected, and with demand for flying beginning a long downward trajectory, are road improvements around the airport even needed anymore?
Thank you. Tony Jones.
Bearing in mind that the 4 local authorities involved and the West of England Combined Authority have all declared climate emergencies, and bearing in mind the need for rapid, far-reaching and unprecedented changes to combat global warming, I request that the Bristol City Council Cabinet take the following actions. 1. Declare that any proposals to make private car travel easier, for example new road building, are incompatible with the Council's declaration of a climate emergency and should be removed from the JLTP4. Request that their fellow local authorities in Wecker make similar declarations, agree that money saved by deleting all such proposals from the JLTP4 should instead be used to enhance proposals in the plan to promote public transport, walking and cycling. Thank you.
Alison Allen.
Thank you. We were delighted by the plan's consideration of pedestrians, cyclists and public transport network users. As you'll be aware, the plans for the third runway at Heathrow have recently been thrown out. We respectfully request that the Joint Executive Committee's constituent county councils reject the JLTP4 and that request that the plans are reworked so that they're in line with the Paris Accord. We also request that the public be given a stake in the decision-making by means of a well-run, legally binding, rather than advisory, citizens' assembly. We understand that funds are available for setting up a citizens' assembly and feel this is the perfect opportunity to implement one. XR, as I'm speaking on behalf of XR, believes that the plans in their current form are unlawful. We want to notify you
Just 10 seconds.
Should the Joint Committee approve the plans, we reserve the right to commence a judicial review on the same grounds as Heathrow, and we're confident that the ruling will be in our favour. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Sam Morris. Oh, that was Sam Morris, sorry. Oliver Lax. Okay. Christopher Orlick, Vari Threffel. Vari, are you... Oh, Chris... He is here. Okay, great.
No, Aileen's going to do it.
Oh, Aileen, okay. Yeah. Okay, you pre-prepared that, so that's okay, yeah.
In both the JTLP4 and BCC Transport Strategy 2018, there are uncountable references to sustainable transport, healthy options, walking and cycling, and public transport. The most popular transport interventions in the JTLP mention tackling congestion and air quality and reallocating road space for walking and cycling, mass transit, rail station enhancements, etc. It also states that to achieve carbon neutral transport requires a substantial shift from cars to public transport and cycling and walking. And Bristol City Council has already noted the 300 premature deaths per year due to air quality. In light of these clear commitments to healthy travel, I would ask BCCs to reject WECA's plan to build 10 new roads, carving through the countryside in areas like Stockwood and Whitchurch. We know that more road space means more traffic, and that Bristol would have to reduce traffic by around 40% to hit its decarbonised target. Put the money into walking and cycling and public transport. In light of Greta Thunberg's visit 3 days ago, this road building makes no sense. I urge Cabinet to reject the JTLP recommendations for road building.
Okay, Kim Hicks.
Thank you. People of Bristol, particularly Bristol South, want solutions to the current transport issues in their area. Independent inspectors found that the JSP was thrown out because it was not put together on a robust, consistent and objective basis. The same people, Bristol City Council included, have put together the JLTP4. It appears that you have not learnt the lessons from the failed JSP. Independent inspectors may not be looking at the JLTP4, but the same people who gave evidence in the JSP hearings are. I am a member of the South Bristol Wrong Road Group. Please read my poem and full statement for details. Please, please don't make the same mistake twice.
Sue Krimlisk. Lisk. Okay, Jackie Walkden. No. Mary Collette. Katie Dick. Martin Garrett. Mark Taylor. Steve Malaya. Paul Hayward.
Thank you. As stated by Mayor Rees recently, quote, City Council has a moral, ecological and legal duty to clean up the air we breathe. to improve health and save lives in Bristol. The health consequences of pollution are described by WHO as a ticking time bomb, and rumours are rife that Whitehall is currently looking at ways of shifting any financial liability arising from public health claims away from central government to devolved authorities. Coming to JLTP4, WECA's emphasis on developing roads is in direct conflict with its own strategic environmental assessment objectives and assessment criteria, quote, to reduce transport-related air pollution and carbon emissions in line with national targets. Furthermore,
just 15 seconds. Okay.
Conspicuous by its absence is climate change. There appears to be none. In this document, it mentions benefits to Bristol City Council, last paragraph. There is no mention of reducing carbon emissions or improving air quality in Bristol. That is, I find, very alarming.
Thank you. Okay, Felicity Radford. Mark Smalley. David Gray.
Strenuous efforts will be made to improve electricity supply infrastructure, but supply may be outstripped by the anticipated massive rise in demand from charging electric vehicles. Because electric vehicle charging requirements depend on the daily mileage, local planning should reduce this risk by reducing commuting distances, guiding new employment to places where there are currently high levels of net out commuting, and new housing to places where there are currently high levels of net in commuting. The Mayor referred earlier to the, the Mayor invited comments on the climate change strategy, and one of the things that is mentioned in my report, one of the things that's mentioned in my report is the challenge of agreeing with the WECA councils in North Somerset how to jointly reduce commuting distances. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, David. Diana Warner. Sarah Poppy Jackson. Tarisha Finnegan-Clark. Christina Biggs. I saw Christina outside. I think she left. Vari Threffel. Vari.
Yes, thank you, Marvin. So I've submitted a joint statement from WECA overview and scrutiny. So I just encourage you really both to kind of read that and the recommendations within it. The broad consensus is that there's good things in here, but the problem is that everything seems to be in here. So there seems to be a collection of everybody's voices. The difficult decisions haven't really been made. There's not a clear idea of the prioritisation of major schemes, and there's not really much clarity in terms of then how those things are going to be paid for. So really, as a document, it's a little bit meaningless. Bristol City Council has shown real leadership around climate change through our One City Plan and through all the work that we've done as a city, and this really should be translated regionally. 32% of carbon emissions are related to transport, and this should be articulated throughout this document. GLTP4, if adopted, will be our statutory document. So there are interests out there as to why this should be adopted. My recommendation would be to strip that back to the things that actually matter, the things that we want to be funded now, and then review for GLTP5.
Okay. Stephen Clark.
Yes, thank you, Marvin. I echo Kai and Vari, really. There's lots of good stuff in here. There are too many roads, including a number of motorway junctions. But that's not really the main point of my statement. My main point is that this may be open to legal challenge because of last week's Heathrow decision in the Court of Appeal. I've read that decision, and it says three things. You have to specifically look at plans for any major infrastructure against the Paris Accords. Number two, you have to consider the April 2019 change from 80% carbon reduction to 100%. And number three, you need to include information and data on the potential carbon emissions from those new developments. I don't think any of those three things have happened in this report.
10 seconds.
When the Welsh Government looked at it pre-Heathrow, but when they looked at it through these lenses, they scrapped the Newport bypass. This needs to go back for review now, not after it's been agreed.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay. Paul O'Rourke.
I'd just like to focus a bit on what we're here to do today. I agree with what other people have said. You're here today to note this document. If in doing that, you're accepting it. Kai was very persuasive about picking out the best things that are in it, but we accept the whole thing, and that's sort of business as usual. And I think those days have gone. We've all agreed that there is a climate emergency, and that we need to change the way we're doing things. You have an opportunity here today to send the message to WECA, and by that I mean just refuse to note this document and demand that it is amended and changed as other people have asked. I think to lose that opportunity today, you know, is losing credibility, and what people are saying about the fact that, you know, we've got our climate strategy, all of the things we're doing. By not doing this here today, you're sending a very loud message.
Okay, our last speaker, Tim Kent, isn't here, but I see Christina, you just come back in. You were in the list. Did you want us to come back for your statement?
Yes, so I represent the Friends of Suburban Bristol Railways, and we're here to say that there's obviously quite a good rail element in the joint local transport plan. We like to think it's due to our tireless campaigning, where we do go to all the WECA meetings, and we've been contributing to all the public consultations, and we did a 3,000 postcard campaign to get the public aware of what was possible with rail. So, that there is I think there's a good rail component in the JLTP4. Obviously, it can always be improved. So the statement outlines the improvements, and I hope you'll pass them on to officers. In particular, the main omission is Coldpit Heath. So the station of Coldpit Heath
Just 10 seconds, Christina.
Sorry, so okay. Coldpit Heath is just outside the ring road. So if you open the station there, people can flow from the ring road up. You might not need to do junction 18A, and it would save a heck of a lot of traffic into the M32. So that's
Okay.
our final plea for the joint transport plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. So let's go to public forum questions now. We have one from Kim Hicks.
Thousands of people think you have not reflected their views in the JLTP4, despite waiting 10 months for the consultation report to be issued. Are you comfortable with the fact that the revised plan did not take into account over a third of all the comments submitted, i.e. 1,600 of the 4,200 comments appear to have had no impact whatsoever?
Do you want me to answer? Thanks, Kim, for your question. This is obviously a combined authority document. Obviously, here in Bristol, we've dealt with the Bristol section of it, which incidentally contains no new roads within the Bristol boundary. As you said, 4,200 people out of 1.3 million citizens in the JLTP region responded. So when you say we're ignoring thousands of people, it's worth remembering that less than 0.3% of people responded to the consultation that live within the area. So we always need to remember that this cannot be regarded as a representative sample of opinion. As I said, when I was moving the document, the plan is an interim. And, I'll make it clear, when I've been in the Transport Board meetings at WECA, we've been very forceful in pushing forward the public transport priorities. As I said, the bus deal, the mass transit have been highly pursued by me when I've been in the room. And other authorities, not so much, I would say. We've got a situation where some authorities are supporting removal of bus lanes, and there's authorities that are still supporting bypasses and things like that. So we have very much pushed the public transport priority through WECA.
Did you have a second question? Kim?
A second question, or can I respond to that one?
You can, supplementary, apologies.
Supplementary, thank you. On the point that you say that the 1,600 comments were not necessarily representative, they are of this particular area of South Bristol. I didn't see any comments for the ring road to be on Whitchurch Lane in Whitchurch, Bristol. You said there were some good points in the plan. Can you confirm that using Whitchurch Lane, a residential road, is one of the bad points?
Right, so very carefully worded that is. Obviously, you know, there's, you've been in meetings with me and with the Wrong Road group, and obviously there is an options development report being looked at, and obviously made it clear that it's, if anything happens there, it's 8 years away, maybe even more. And as this is an interim plan, we expect changes to that. But obviously, I can't commit to anything here and now.
Did you got your second question, Kim?
Second question. To protect Bristol City Council's residents' interest, why did Bristol City Council not even carry out a feasibility study on Whitchurch Lane to match at least the level of research that Baines did on the option assessments report on the plans for the South Bristol Orbital Road on their side of the boundary?
I think there's there is a draft report that I think you put in the Freedom of Information request that we've provided to you. So there has been work to the same level of BAF on that, and you've got that information that I believe was sent to you last week.
I've received it, but it's not the same level. It doesn't cover Whitchurch Lane and the speed humps and the 20-mile-an-hour speed limits.
Well, it's a stage 1 report, and obviously that just looks at some of the broad principles. Obviously, if we're moving ahead to a stage 2, that we're definitely doing this, then obviously you'd have a more detailed report. But as I said, this is potentially eight years away if anything happens. And the reason only a stage 1 has been done is just because of that fact, and we've not taken it any further than a stage 1 report.
Do you have a supplementary?
It appears that other councils and other authorities are calling the shots. Who is truly looking after the interests of the South Bristol people?
Well, this is Bristol City Council. We take responsibility in terms of what the position of Bristol is. Obviously, you've heard today about some of the challenges that we've got as a city around how we deal with the growth in housing and jobs that's come into the area, and obviously how we move those people around is an important part of the jigsaw, really. So, improving transport connectivity is an important part of that process. And as I said, the issue that you're rightly concerned about is obviously something that's obviously at stage 1, as I said. We're not looking at this, for, as I said, 8-10 years time, unless and potentially it's something that might not happen. And as I said, the report is an interim report, and we want to review all the schemes in it as soon as we can. The ones that we don't quite think meet up to the test of the climate emergency and the direction that we want to see.
So, Carla Denyer, your question now.
Thank you. It's really positive to hear that you'll be pushing for an immediate review. I agree that there's some good stuff in the JLTP, but I also agree with Vari and others that there's also some really bad stuff in there. So, as several people have mentioned, it's well understood amongst transport experts that you can only achieve mode share away from the private car if you provide public transport and reduce road capacity at the same time. Just providing public transport on its own doesn't do it. So, are you willing to commit explicitly here to work with the other West of England councils to not just get a review, but explicitly say that you will call for scrapping the new road building and road widening schemes before it's approved on the 20th?
Okay. I just think I just have to clarify the position there. As I said, there's no new roads proposed within the Bristol boundary, and actually the roads that are proposed are in South Gloucestershire, They're in North Somerset and they're in Baines. So, for example, you said North Somerset aren't pursuing new road building. They've got the Banwell bypass in there that they're still pursuing. And a couple of meetings ago, Don Davis was 100% behind the Banwell bypass. Obviously, the link road from Hicksgate to the A37 is within the boundary of Bath and North East Somerset. You've got the motorway junctions improvements there in South Gloss, motorway junctions improvements in North Somerset. So to paint a picture that all the other authorities are against road building and Bristol's just going along and supporting it, I think that's a false picture to give, to be honest with you. As I said, I've been at the forefront of promoting public transport options within the West of England Transport Board, around the bus deal, around the mass transit system, and obviously now we've got the local cycling and walking improvement plan out to consultation. I'll be there making sure that that's properly funded when it's fully adopted.
Do you have a supplementary, Carla?
Well, my initial question hasn't been answered yet.
Well, he's given the answer, so you can express your dissatisfaction with that, or you can come up with a supplementary.
It literally hasn't been answered. There wasn't a yes or a no.
Okay, well, that's Kai answers the question the way he answered it. If you're not satisfied, then you just have to ask a supplementary or ask another question.
Okay. In that case, can I ask you if you are familiar with the principle of induced demand as it relates to road capacity? Have you come across that theory?
Well, the theory of just building roads for cars is obviously if you build road for cars, then obviously that's going to encourage more use. So I'm fully aware of that. But the principle we take in Bristol is that we don't go for that. So we go for bus priority measures. We go for cycling and walking improvements. So there's never going to be a situation in Bristol where we support a scheme that's just about increasing capacity for cars.
Okay, supplementary. So, for the back of that, I mean, it's worth. So, So, can I bring it forward to cabinet members? I've got a few comments on this as well. Any cabinet members like to comment on this one? No? Okay. So, just to go over this. First of all, the key principle. Something very important here is there are no roads in Bristol with this. So actually, this has happened a few times where I think in many ways people have targeted the wrong meeting. I'm sure the meetings in North Somerset, Baines and South Gloss are open to attendance as well to talk about their approaches to transport. Our drive here in our engagement with WECA has been about public transport. It's been about our mass transit system, our bus deal, and obviously what we get from the rail networks. The way the world is, rather than the way the world I'd like it to be, is a challenge that if we were to reject this, as Dave pointed out at the beginning, you've got to have it to go and draw down your money. We work within a context. We didn't design it. It is the context as it is. We would end up losing the ability to draw down money for our own schemes within Bristol. We've been delaying this by 18 months to 2 years. That's the mass transit system we've been pushing on and that we believe will take millions of car journeys off of Bristol roads. Our bus deals, in which we're looking to double the frequency of buses on our main transit routes, including bus prioritisation and priority, and everything we're trying to do around rail. So we need to be honest about the field of play we're working on and the stakes and the stakes, at play. We'll continue to push for what we need in Bristol, which is a viable alternative to private car use, so we can get that modal shift. And we are also working across the Western Gateway area. In fact, we had all the Western Gateway leaders here this morning. And the number one issue that we are talking about, and we talked about with Don and Toby and Tim in a room with the leaders of Cardiff and Swindon, Swansea and the LEPs as well, was about transport and having a viable public transport offer, not just within our cities and our city regions, but between them. We even talked about integrated ticketing. That means you can get on a form of public transport in Chepstow and get to your place in Bath on a single ticket that takes you across different modes of transport. So the ambition is there. But we have to be real that rejecting the JLTP 4 would knock us back 18 months to 2 years. In the meantime, the city will continue to grow around us, and we'll have an infrastructure that can't cope, and we'll end up with the worst of all potential outcomes. So it's a challenge for us, as a city to deal with that. But again, I say we're dealing with the consequences of 40 or 50 years of the city's inability to really deliver mass change. So I just want to thank everyone for their contributions to this debate. The door is still open on that. We're happy to talk to people outside of this meeting as well. And Kai, Cabinet notes the recommendations as set out in this report today. So thanks for your work on this. Do you have any final comments, Kai?
No, I think I've outlined everything really in terms of why we're going down this route, and just want to re-emphasise and be very clear. This is an interim report, and we'll review every scheme in it to make sure it meets the priorities that we're trying to deliver. So I just want to make that very clear before there's any misunderstandings that leave this room. Thank you.
Well, yeah, let's hope not. Yeah, thank you. We're now on to agenda item 21. Which actually is our exempt session. So we're going to be going to the exclusion of the press and the public. But before we move to exempt session, we will consider public forum statements relating to the next report. We have two public forum statements. The first by Mary Page. Okay, and the second by Councillor Gary Hopkins. Okay. So the head of paid service and the monitoring officer, in consultation with myself, have agreed that the call in of this decision is excluded, as the delay likely to be caused by the call-in process would seriously prejudice the council's or the public interest. They have agreed that the decision proposed is reasonable in all the circumstances and to it being treated as a matter of urgency. The next report contains commercially sensitive information. Therefore, I move that the under section 100A in brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following item of business on the grounds that it involves a likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3, part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act. As it is more practical, I'm going to ask Cabinet members to move to 1PO9 to discuss this item. This concludes the public part of the meeting today, and I'd like to thank you for your attending. The date of the next Cabinet meeting is Tuesday, 22nd of January 2020 at 4 p.
Yeah, it's the April.
Right. Anyway, we'll send out the date of the April 2020 at 4 p.m. 22nd. Thank you.
Version 7.